Imagine a life so immense, so profoundly transformative, that its echoes still shape the world, more than 2,000 years later. This is the story of Alexander the Great, a name etched into legend. A figure whose ambition knew no borders, whose conquests reshaped continents, and whose vision continues to stir the human spirit. Born in the rising kingdom of Macedon, Alexander was no ordinary prince. His father, Philip II, was a warrior king who forged a nation from chaos and dreamed of an empire. His mother, Olympias, filled with mysticism and fire, believed her son was destined for greatness, not by lineage, but by divine will. To sharpen his mind, they summoned the greatest teacher of the age, Aristotle, philosopher and seeker of truth. In the shade of olive groves and among scrolls of ancient wisdom, the boy's restless mind grew wide and deep. And when fate called, Alexander did not merely inherit his father's legacy, he stepped beyond it. With unmatched courage and brilliant strategy, he led a campaign across the known world. From the fractured cities of Greece to the towering palaces of Persia, from the deserts of Egypt to the rivers of India, he carved a path through history like a comet across the night sky. But this tale is more than military triumph. It is a tapestry woven from both light and shadow, of fierce ideals and ruthless ambition, of loyalty and betrayal, of cultural fusion and imperial domination. He dreamed of unity among nations, yet chased that dream with fire and steel. His was ablaze with purpose, intense, brief, unforgettable. A vision so vast it could not be contained. And though he died at a very young age of 32, his legacy did not fade. It lived on through the lands he touched, the cities he built, and the ideas he set into motion. In this episode of Restful Historian, we'll follow the life of Alexander the Great, from his early days in Macedon to his legendary campaigns across the known world. We'll explore his rise, his ambitions, his victories, and the lasting mark he left on history. So get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let your mind drift gently back in time. The story of Alexander the Great begins now. Before the thunder of his name echoed across continents, before cities rose in his honor and empires crumbled at his feet, Alexander was simply a child. A child born not into a quiet world, but into a whirlwind of prophecy, ambition, and the wild, untamed spirit of ancient Macedonia. It was the summer of 356 BCE. Deep in the heart of Macedonia, in the royal capital of Pella, a city nestled amidst rolling hills, a momentous event unfolded. Within the palace walls, adorned with intricate mosaics and painted frescoes, a cry cut through the rhythms of court life. A son had been born to King Philip II and Queen Olympias. His name would be Alexander. Now, Macedonia wasn't exactly the shining star of the Greek world at this time. To the sophisticated Athenians or the disciplined Spartans, Macedonians were considered hardy, perhaps a bit rough around the edges, more suited to mountain living than philosophical debate. But this rugged land was changing, and leading that change was Alexander's father, Philip II. Philip was a force of nature in his own right. He had inherited a fractured, vulnerable kingdom and, through sheer will and brilliant strategic reforms, transformed it into a formidable power. During his youth, Philip had spent time in Thebes, learning about the advanced military tactics and political maneuvering of southern Greece. He brought that knowledge back home, imposing order and forging a terrifyingly effective army. His greatest creation was the Macedonian phalanx, a dense formation of soldiers armed with incredibly long spears, virtually unstoppable in battle. Philip consolidated his rule, formed crucial alliances through political marriages, and constantly pushed Macedonia's borders outward. Many saw him not just as a king, but as a living war machine, relentless, cunning, and always calculating. But Alexander's path wasn't solely shaped by his powerful father. His mother, Olympias, was a figure of intense mystery and fierce devotion. A princess from Epirus, she claimed a direct bloodline to the legendary hero Achilles himself. Olympias was known for her passionate piety, deeply involved in the wild, ecstatic rites of the god Dionysus. Ceremonies filled with trance, symbolic fire, and raw emotion. Rumors swirled around her. She was said to keep sacred snakes as companions, and her dreams were vivid, almost prophetic. Some feared her. Others believed she truly communed with the divine. Olympias was utterly convinced her son was destined for greatness, not just through Philip's might, but through divine intervention. She whispered tales of being struck by lightning in a dream on the night Alexander was conceived. Others even spoke of a serpent that lay beside her in her sleep. And as if to confirm these omens, on the very night Alexander was born, far across the Aegean Sea, one of the ancient world's wonders, the great temple of Artemis in Ephesus, burned to the ground. Priests there read the omens, declaring it a sign, a curse for Asia, they proclaimed. Perhaps, too, a signal for a new power rising. From his earliest moments, Alexander was wrapped in layers of legend. He was described as a quiet child, unusually observant, with a gaze that held a seriousness beyond his years. He listened, he watched, and he absorbed everything. His mother filled his mind with the heroic poetry of Homer, especially the Iliad. She didn't just tell him stories of Achilles. She presented them as instructions on honor, rage, glory, and the pursuit of an everlasting legacy. Alexander wasn't content to merely hear about heroes. He yearned to become one. The royal court in Pella was no peaceful nursery. It was a volatile environment, a constant interplay of political alliances, arranged marriages, and whispered intrigues. Philip, brilliant as he was not faithful to Olympias, taking multiple other wives for strategic reasons. This only made Olympias, proud and isolated, more protective and more determined to instill in her son a sense of unique, almost divine, identity. Alexander walked a knife's edge, seemingly destined to bear the armor of two conflicting worlds, his father's cold, strategic ruthlessness, and his mother's fierce belief in his divine destiny. There's a legendary story from his childhood that perfectly captures his exceptional nature, the taming of Bucephalus. A magnificent black stallion, wild and untamable, was brought to Philip's court. The horse threw every rider who dared approach. Philip, unimpressed, ordered the beast taken away. But young Alexander, barely 10 years old, watched the horse with a keen eye. He noticed something. The horse seemed afraid of its own shadow. Alexander asked for a chance. The court, of course, laughed, but Philip, intrigued by his son's unusual request, allowed it. Alexander approached the powerful beast not with brute force, but with quiet perception. He gently turned the horse toward the sun. As the shadows vanished, the horse calmed. And then, in a moment that would become legend, the boy smoothly mounted the stallion and rode it triumphantly. The court fell silent. Philip, overwhelmed with pride, is said to have declared, "My son, seek a kingdom worthy of yourself. Macedonia is too small for you." As Alexander grew, his education was just as exceptional. He was surrounded by the best minds, studying rhetoric, logic, music, medicine, and mathematics. He devoured tales of distant lands and absorbed the heroic deeds of figures like Cyrus the Great, Heracles, and Theseus. But his hunger for knowledge, like his ambition, quickly outgrew his early tutors. And so, when he was 13, Philip knew exactly who to call. He summoned a philosopher from the town of Stagare, a man whose intellect was matched only by his fame. His name was Aristotle. For now, let us remain in Pella, where a young boy dreams not of toys or games, but of empires. His feet press lightly upon mosaic floors. His eyes scan the horizon. He is still just a child, but the world has already begun to shift beneath him. Alexander has entered history, and history, truly, will never let go. The boy king-to-be, Alexander, had already shown flashes of extraordinary insight and an uncanny command, even over a wild, magnificent horse like Bucephalus. He devoured tales of ancient heroes, dreaming of Achilles and the glory of battle. But Philip, his shrewd father, understood something vital. To truly conquer and, more importantly, to rule vast lands, his son needed more than just a sharp sword arm or a quick mind for tactics. He needed wisdom. He needed a framework for his boundless ambition. He needed a philosopher. And so, in 343 BCE, when Alexander was a bright, intensely curious 13-year-old, Philip sent messengers to summon the greatest intellectual of their time, Aristotle. This titan of thought, a former student of the legendary Plato, was then living quietly, pursuing his own studies. Philip's offer was not just generous, it was grand. He rebuilt Aristotle's hometown of Stega, which had been destroyed in earlier conflicts, and even constructed a special school for him in the serene groves of the Nymphaeum at Mysa. This wasn't merely hiring a tutor, it was an investment in the future of an empire, a clear sign that Alexander's mind was deemed as crucial as his military prowess. For 3 pivotal years, from 343 to 340 BCE, Alexander lived and learned directly under Aristotle's guidance. Mysa was no ordinary schoolroom. It was a place where ancient trees provided shade, and the gentle murmur of nature encouraged deep thought and vibrant discussion. Here, away from the constant, shifting sands of court politics in Pella, Alexander was immersed in an education unlike any other. He studied alongside a select group of young Macedonian nobles, boys who would one day become his closest friends, confidants, and most trusted generals, including men like Ptolemy, Hephaestion, and Cassander. Aristotle's teaching method was not about rote memorization. It was about asking questions, observing the world, and learning to think critically. Aristotle's curriculum for the young prince was incredibly vast and demanding. He delved into philosophy, exploring profound ideas about ethics, justice, and the art of good governance. He urged Alexander to consider the ideal way to rule, to understand the complexities of human nature, and to ponder the very fabric of existence. The philosopher also instilled in him a deep appreciation for science. Alexander learned about botany, the study of plants, zoology, the study of animals, and even the fundamentals of medicine. This sparked a lifelong curiosity in Alexander, who would later send back countless specimens and observations to Aristotle from his distant campaigns. Aristotle also honed Alexander's skills in rhetoric, teaching him the powerful art of persuasive speaking. This was a crucial lesson for a future leader who would need to inspire vast armies, negotiate with powerful kings, and address diverse peoples across a vast empire. He trained Alexander in logic, the discipline of clear, organized thinking, a skill just as vital for devising military strategies as it was for understanding complex political situations. Beyond these practical subjects, Alexander's education included music, poetry, and drama, nurturing his artistic side and his understanding of human emotion. But perhaps the most profound connection Aristotle forged was with Alexander's already deep love for literature, especially the epic works of Homer. The Iliad, the tale of Achilles and the Trojan War, became Alexander's constant companion. Aristotle provided him with a specially annotated copy, which Alexander would famously keep beneath his pillow, alongside his dagger, for the rest of his life. Aristotle helped him to see these ancient stories not just as thrilling adventures, but as powerful lessons in courage, honor, leadership, and the pursuit of glory, kleos. The impact of Aristotle on Alexander was immense, shaping the very way he approached leadership and how he saw the world. From his teacher, Alexander learned the value of careful observation and the importance of rational thought. This is likely why, during his conquests, he would travel with scholars and scientists, dispatching them to document new species, study foreign cultures, and map unknown lands. Aristotle's teachings encouraged him to think systematically about governance and the organization of society, even as Alexander's ambition would later push him towards integrating diverse cultures in ways Aristotle might not have fully envisioned. For while their bond was deep, there were subtle differences in their visions. Aristotle, the quintessential Greek intellectual, likely saw Alexander as a vehicle for spreading pure Greek civilization. Alexander, however, began to dream of something even grander, a fusion of cultures, a universal empire that transcended the strict Greek versus barbarian divide. This ambitious, world-spanning vision would eventually lead Alexander to decisions and actions that perhaps diverged from some of his revered teachers' more traditional Hellenic ideals. When Alexander left Mysa at the age of 16, he was no longer just the spirited prince who had tamed wild horses. His mind was not merely filled with facts, but with powerful tools for thought, a profound respect for learning, and an almost insatiable desire to apply his vast knowledge to the world. He was a king in training, armed not just with the finest weaponry, but with a philosophy that would guide his hand, even as his unparalleled ambition propelled him into an unknown future. The shadow of Aristotle, the wise teacher, would forever fall across the path of Alexander, the relentless conqueror. Alexander's mind, honed to a razor's edge by Aristotle, was a formidable instrument. He possessed a scholar's curiosity, a philosopher's yearning for truth, and a poet's soul. Yet, for all his intellectual brilliance, the prince was born into a kingdom whose very heartbeat was the rhythm of the battlefield. His father, Philip II, understood that a king needed more than just wisdom. He needed an iron will, a commander's instinct, and a complete mastery of warfare. Alexander was destined to inherit not just a throne, but a war machine, and Philip intended to make sure his son was its perfect, lethal operator. Even before the great Aristotle set foot in Mysa, Alexander's childhood had been steeped in the harsh realities and rigorous discipline of Macedonian military life. From his earliest years, he was immersed in a training regimen designed to forge future commanders. Unlike the city-states to the south, where citizen soldiers were called up when needed, Macedonia boasted a professional, standing army, and its royal princes were expected to be its finest warriors. Alexander learned to ride with breathtaking proficiency, a skill that extended far beyond mere horsemanship. He mastered the complex maneuvers of the elite companion cavalry, understanding how to ride in formation, to charge, to pivot, and to strike as one formidable unit. He was taught to wield the sarissa, the impossibly long Macedonian spear, with a balance and strength that belied his youth, along with the shorter sword, dagger, and the heavy, protective shield. Hunting was not merely a royal pastime, it was an integral part of his military education. These dangerous expeditions into the wild forests and mountains of Macedon instilled courage, developed his physical endurance, and honed his strategic thinking. A hunt was a live exercise in tracking, trapping, ambushing, and confronting danger head-on, skills directly transferable to the battlefield. He learned to survive in the wilderness, to endure hardship, and to make split-second decisions under pressure. Perhaps most critically, Philip ensured that Alexander's military education was profoundly practical and deeply immersive. The young prince was not merely a student observing from a distance. He lived among the soldiers, sharing their grueling drills, eating their rations, and competing in their physical contests. This direct, often brutal, experience fostered an unbreakable bond and a profound understanding of the common Macedonian soldier. He learned their grievances, their hopes, their endurance, and what motivated them. This intimate knowledge of his troops would become a hallmark of his unparalleled leadership, allowing him to inspire fierce loyalty and push his men beyond their perceived limits. By the age of 16, Alexander's formal academic tutelage concluded, and his practical military apprenticeship began in earnest. Philip, ever the master of strategic delegation, entrusted Alexander with momentous responsibilities. In 340 BCE, while Philip himself embarked on significant campaigns, first against the Greek city of Perinthus, and then the critical siege of Byzantium, which controlled vital trade routes, he left Alexander as regent of Macedon. This was far more than an honorary title. Alexander was given full authority over the kingdom, tasked with maintaining internal stability, managing state affairs, and, crucially, defending its borders against any threat. This period was Alexander's first true taste of sovereign power, a rigorous test of his administrative capabilities and his nascent leadership in his father's absence. Alexander rose to the challenge with swift, decisive action. During his regency, a stubborn Thracian tribe, the Mede, inhabiting the rugged lands to Macedon's northeast, launched a rebellion against Macedonian authority. This was not just a local nuisance. Thracian uprisings were a recurring problem and a potential distraction from Philip's grander designs. Alexander, without hesitation or a shred of doubt, personally led a military expedition against them. He crushed the rebellion thoroughly and ruthlessly, expelling the Mede from their territory and establishing a new Macedonian settlement in their place. This new city, strategically positioned to secure the region, was tellingly named Alexandropolis, and he populated it with diverse groups of people. This early triumph demonstrated not only his military competence and his readiness to employ harsh measures when necessary, but also his embryonic vision for founding and populating new cities, a practice that would define his future conquests across Asia. But the true baptism by fire, the definitive moment that showcased Alexander's martial prowess, arrived at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE. This was no mere border skirmish. It was a climactic clash that would determine the fate of Greece. Philip, having steadily expanded Macedonian influence over the fractious Greek city-states for years, now faced a formidable united front. Athens and Thebes, traditional rivals but now bound by a common fear of Macedonian hegemony, assembled their finest armies to challenge Philip's dominance. The stakes were immense. Greek freedom and the balance of power hung in the balance. Philip, a tactical genius, deployed his forces with characteristic precision. Alexander, then only 18 years old, was given command of the crucial companion cavalry, Philip's elite heavy cavalry unit, renowned for its devastating shock charges. He was positioned on the critical left flank of the Macedonian line. Facing him was the famed the Sacred Band, an elite force of 300 hoplites, previously considered invincible and the pride of Thebes. As the battle commenced, Philip executed a masterful feigned retreat on his right wing, drawing the Athenian forces forward and inadvertently creating a crucial gap in the enemy line. It was at this precise moment that Alexander, with audacious courage and impeccable timing, led his companion cavalry in a furious, irresistible charge directly into that opening. He smashed through the Sacred Band, utterly breaking their formation and their morale. This decisive breakthrough allowed the Macedonian infantry to envelop the now disorganized Greek forces, leading to a brutal and overwhelming Macedonian victory. Chaeronea was a turning point not just for Greece, but for Alexander. His independent command and his critical role in breaking the formidable Sacred Band confirmed him as a military leader of exceptional ability, proving his courage, his tactical acumen, and his capacity to execute complex battle plans under immense pressure. This monumental victory also marked the effective culmination of Philip's legacy for Alexander. Philip had not only unified Greece under Macedonian control, ending centuries of internecine warfare among the city-states, but he had also meticulously laid the groundwork for his crowning ambition, the invasion of the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire. For generations, Persia had been the arch-nemesis of the Greek world, and Philip had shrewdly framed his planned invasion as a righteous pan-Hellenic crusade, a sacred mission to avenge the Persian invasions of Greece from over a century earlier. He had spent years consolidating resources, building a powerful navy, and even dispatching advance forces under his trusted general Parmenion into Asia Minor. Alexander, therefore, was not merely inheriting a kingdom, he was inheriting a meticulously prepared military machine, a unified Greek alliance, and a deeply ingrained, almost sacred, mission to conquer the greatest empire the world had ever known. He was a product of the finest intellectual and military training, a prince of war forged in the crucible of his father's strategic brilliance and his own innate genius. At just 18, Alexander stood poised on the brink, ready to inherit a destiny that would soon catapult him onto the global stage and eclipse even the monumental achievements of his father. The victory at Chaeronea had elevated Philip II to an unmatched position. Greece lay subdued. His army was the finest in the world, and his grand plan, the invasion of Persia, was meticulously laid, ready to unleash. The stage was set for the culmination of his life's work. Yet, even at the zenith of his power, a venomous serpent was coiling within the Macedonian court, waiting to strike. The years leading up to 336 BCE had been fraught with escalating tension within Philip's own family. Philip, a man driven by both ambition and appetite, had taken a new, much younger wife, Cleopatra, a Macedonian noblewoman of high standing. This marriage was a dangerous political gamble. Unlike Alexander's mother, Olympias, who hailed from Epirus, Cleopatra was fully Macedonian. At the elaborate wedding feast, Cleopatra's uncle Attalus, a powerful general, audaciously toasted the hope for a legitimate heir to the throne. This was a direct, public insult aimed squarely at Alexander, suggesting his claim was somehow weaker. A furious Alexander, barely containing his rage, hurled a drinking cup at Attalus, and Philip, in a drunken fury, drew his sword and lunged at his own son, only to stumble and fall. The raw hostility, the very public humiliation, and the long-simmering hatred between Olympias and Philip had finally boiled over. Alexander, sensing his position as heir was dangerously precarious, soon retreated from court with his mother, finding refuge in Epirus. Though a fragile reconciliation eventually brought Alexander back, the deep wounds within the royal family never truly healed. Then, in the summer of 336 BCE, as Philip made final, triumphant preparations for the Persian campaign and celebrated the lavish marriage of his daughter Cleopatra, not to be confused with his new wife, to Olympias' brother, the king of Epirus, a shocking act shattered the fragile peace. Philip, walking into the grand theatre at Aegae, completely unguarded amidst the jubilant crowds, was suddenly and brutally struck down. His assassin was Pausanias, one of his own bodyguards, who plunged a dagger into Philip's side before attempting a desperate escape. Pausanias was instantly cut down by Philip's loyal guards, dying before he could utter a single word about his motives or any potential co-conspirators. The news of Philip's murder ripped through Macedon and echoed across the Greek world, igniting a whirlwind of speculation. Who was truly behind this audacious act? The immediate suspect was Pausanias himself, perhaps driven by a personal grievance. But the whispers quickly grew darker, casting suspicion far wider. Some fingers pointed towards the Persian king Darius III, hoping to eliminate the formidable threat posed by Philip. More chillingly, many eyes, both then and now, turned towards Alexander and his mother, Olympias. Olympias had a compelling motive: revenge against Philip for his constant betrayals, her own marginalization, and the direct threat to her son's succession. Alexander, too, stood to gain everything. His path to the throne, once threatened, was now suddenly clear. The true mastermind behind Philip's assassination remains one of history's most tantalizing and fiercely debated unsolved mysteries. For Alexander, barely 20 years old, this was the ultimate test. His very survival hinged on his immediate, decisive action. The throne was not simply his for the taking. It had to be seized and secured with unwavering resolve. He faced a treacherous power vacuum, with potentially hostile factions within the powerful Macedonian aristocracy, including nobles who commanded significant troops, like Attalus. Alexander reacted with astonishing speed and a chilling ruthlessness that belied his youth. Within hours of his father's death, he presented himself to the Macedonian army, securing their immediate, unwavering loyalty. His inner circle of trusted companions and seasoned generals, men who had fought alongside him at Chaeronea and knew his capabilities, quickly rallied to his side, forming an unbreakable phalanx around their new king. His immediate priority was the ruthless elimination of any potential rivals. Alexander wasted no time. Attalus, who was then commanding an advance force in Asia Minor, was swiftly executed, ostensibly for conspiring with Athens. More brutally, Cleopatra, Philip's young widow, and her infant son were also killed, a cold but effective measure to extinguish any alternative claims to the throne. Alexander sent a terrifyingly clear message. His succession was absolute, and any challenge, real or perceived, would be met with swift, lethal force. These decisive, some would say brutal, actions quickly solidified his ironclad control over Macedon. But securing Macedon was only the first challenge. News of Philip's death spread like wildfire through the Greek city-states, who, ever yearning for independence, saw it as a golden opportunity to throw off Macedonian rule. Thebes, always fiercely rebellious, immediately revolted, expelling its Macedonian garrison and proclaiming its freedom. Athens, spurred on by the fiery anti-Macedonian orator Demosthenes, also began to stir, convinced that the young Alexander would be an easier opponent than his formidable father. Alexander's response was a masterclass in psychological warfare and overwhelming force. Instead of marching slowly south, giving the rebels time to gather strength, he launched a lightning campaign, covering immense distances with astonishing speed. His sudden, unexpected appearance outside the walls of Thebes, having seemingly materialized out of nowhere, stunned the rebellious city. When Thebes, confident in its ancient walls and a foolish belief in Alexander's inexperience, refused to surrender, Alexander besieged it. The ensuing battle was short, savage, and utterly devastating. After fierce fighting, the city fell. Alexander made a brutal, unforgettable example of Thebes. He ordered the ancient city to be razed to the ground, its magnificent walls demolished, and its entire population either massacred or sold into slavery. The only exceptions were the temples, the house of the revered poet Pindar, whom Alexander deeply admired, and those who had openly sided with Macedon. The destruction of Thebes was a terrifying and stark demonstration of Alexander's absolute resolve. It sent a chilling shiver of fear through every other Greek city-state, extinguishing any further thoughts of rebellion. The message was unmistakable. There would be no leniency for defiance against the new hegemon of Greece. With Greece firmly back under his ironclad control, Alexander convened a meeting of the Hellenic League, or League of Corinth, the very alliance Philip had forged. Here, the Greek city-states, now utterly cowed by Thebes' brutal fate, formally and unanimously confirmed Alexander as their new hegemon, or supreme commander, for the upcoming invasion of Persia. The great Persian expedition, Philip's cherished dream, was now, irrevocably, Alexander's. In a remarkably short span of time, Alexander had navigated a treacherous political landscape, crushed open rebellion, and secured his absolute authority with a swiftness and ruthlessness that belied his mere 20 years. The serpent's coil of Macedonian court intrigue had been unraveled, and its threats decisively eliminated. Now, with Greece subdued and his army fiercely loyal, the young king, poised on the edge of the known world, turned his gaze eastward. The immense, glittering Persian Empire, already weakened by his father's advance forces, awaited its ultimate challenger. Philip's assassination had sent a ripple of desperate hope through the independent Greek city-states. For centuries, these proud polities had fiercely guarded their autonomy, often engaging in bitter rivalries amongst themselves but fiercely uniting against any perceived foreign threat. Now, with the formidable tyrant Philip gone, many believed the chains of Macedonian hegemony would simply melt away. News, often exaggerated, painted Alexander as an unproven youth, perhaps even weak. Whispers of rebellion quickly escalated into outright defiance, threatening to unravel the fragile unity Philip had painstakingly built. And at the very heart of this burgeoning resistance stood one of Greece's oldest, proudest, and most historically defiant cities, Thebes. Thebes held a unique and storied place in Greek history. It was a city of ancient lineage, once a dominant power in its own right, and later the home of the famed Sacred Band, an elite military unit previously considered invincible on any battlefield. After Philip's decisive victory at Chaeronea, Thebes had been forced to accept a Macedonian garrison within its citadel, the Cadmea, a constant, galling reminder of its subjugation. For the fiercely independent Thebans, Alexander's sudden accession was seen as the perfect, perhaps only, window to reclaim their cherished freedom. As soon as the news of Philip's death arrived, they revolted with a passionate fervor, expelling the Macedonian soldiers from their citadel and loudly proclaiming their independence from the new king. Other cities, emboldened by Thebes' audacious move, began to stir, with powerful Athens, spurred on by the fiery anti-Macedonian orator Demosthenes, considering whether to join the uprising. This nascent rebellion could not be tolerated. For Alexander, still just 20 years old, it was a profound test not only of his military prowess but of his political will. He understood that any hesitation, any perceived weakness, would lead to a cascade of further revolts and shatter the unified front Philip had created. The rebellion needed to be crushed swiftly and absolutely, not just to reassert control, but to send an unmistakable, terrifying message across the entire Greek world. Alexander, true to his burgeoning reputation, launched a lightning-fast counter-campaign, a move designed to stun and paralyze. Instead of a slow, deliberate march that would give the Greek cities time to organize a united front, Alexander drove his army south with breathtaking, unprecedented speed. His Macedonian forces, hardened veterans, covered an astonishing 240 miles in just 14 days, crossing the formidable mountain ranges of the Pindus to appear as if out of thin air. His sudden, almost miraculous arrival outside the imposing walls of Thebes shocked the city to its core. The Thebans, having expected weeks, even months, of preparation time from Alexander, were caught entirely off guard. Alexander, ever the master of strategic calculation, initially offered Thebes a chance to surrender. He demanded only the surrender of the two main rebel leaders, allowing the city to retain its autonomy and its inhabitants to live. But Thebes, either blinded by a desperate, defiant hope for true freedom, or perhaps fatally misjudging the young king's temperament, refused. They foolishly believed their ancient, formidable walls, coupled with their strategic position atop a natural hill, would hold firm against any siege. This defiance, steeped in tragic overconfidence, sealed their fate. The siege that followed was short, brutal, and utterly devastating. Alexander, leading his forces personally and often recklessly, ordered a full-scale assault. The disciplined Macedonian army, deploying its superior siege engines and employing relentless waves of attackers, quickly overwhelmed the city's defenses. A breach was forced, and the veteran soldiers poured into the streets. What followed was a massacre of horrifying proportions. The Macedonian soldiers, many of whom harbored resentment from their comrades killed in the initial Theban uprising, were unleashed without mercy. The narrow streets and squares became killing zones. Men, women, and children were slaughtered indiscriminately as the city descended into unbridled chaos. The air filled with screams, the clash of steel, and the acrid smell of smoke and blood. Temples were ransacked, homes looted, and ancient treasures brutally plundered. When the raw carnage finally subsided, Alexander delivered his chilling, deliberate verdict. Thebes, a city that had once held its own against Athens and Sparta, a beacon of ancient Greek heritage, was to be utterly razed to the ground. Its magnificent walls, built over centuries and steeped in history, were systematically demolished stone by agonizing stone. Its grand buildings, save for a few exceptions, were reduced to smoking rubble. The vast majority of its surviving population, estimated at around 30,000 to 40,000 souls, were rounded up and sold into slavery, their lives shattered, their city erased from the map, a testament to the cost of rebellion. The only structures spared from this horrifying destruction were the city's revered temples, a calculated gesture of piety that showed Alexander still respected the gods, and, famously, the house of the great Greek lyric poet, Pindar. Alexander, a man deeply steeped in Greek culture and literature through Aristotle's teaching, honored the poet even in the midst of total, genocidal destruction. This single, striking act served as a profound paradox, a testament to his appreciation for art and intellect, juxtaposed against the backdrop of unimaginable brutality, highlighting the complex, often contradictory nature of the conqueror himself. The destruction of Thebes was more than just a military victory. It was a psychological hammer blow, a deliberate act of terror that sent a chilling message across all of Greece. It served as a terrifying, undeniable precedent for Alexander's rule. No city, no matter how ancient, how proud, or how defiant, would be safe from his wrath if it dared to challenge his absolute authority. The sheer swiftness of his response, the overwhelming force he employed, and the horrifying finality of Thebes' fate extinguished any further thought of rebellion. The other Greek city-states, witnessing this chilling example, immediately reaffirmed their loyalty and commitment to Alexander as their supreme commander, their newfound hegemon. With his rear secured and Greece utterly cowed, Alexander had cemented his unchallengeable authority through fear as much as through force. The path was now clear. The immense military machine that Philip had painstakingly built, and that Alexander had now ruthlessly refined and proven, was finally ready to turn its gaze eastward. The vast, glittering Persian Empire, completely unaware of the chilling precedent just set in Greece, now awaited its most formidable and unyielding challenger. With the embers of Thebes still smoking and the fear of his name echoing throughout Greece, Alexander had secured his European base. The consolidation of his power was complete. Now, the stage was truly set for the monumental endeavor that would define his life and reshape the ancient world: the invasion of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. This was no ordinary campaign. This was a direct challenge to the greatest power on earth, a realm that spanned 3 continents and dwarfed Macedon in wealth, manpower, and sheer geographical scale. The very idea of invading Persia was audacious, almost unthinkable, for any power other than Philip's newly forged Macedonian-Greek alliance. Previous Greek attempts, like the Anabasis of Xenophon and the 10,000, had been desperate retreats, not full-scale invasions. This expedition would demand an unprecedented level of logistical and strategic mastery. Imagine feeding, watering, and supplying an army of tens of thousands of men, plus thousands of horses, for a journey that would take them across vast, unknown territories, far from any established supply base. Every spear, every shield, every grain of wheat, every drop of water had to be accounted for, planned, and transported over incredible distances. This alone was a challenge that would cripple lesser leaders. Philip II, Alexander's brilliant father, had meticulously laid the groundwork for this grand design. He had spent years accumulating resources, developing new siege technologies, and most importantly, forging the Macedonian army into the most formidable fighting force of its time. He instilled in his commanders a deep understanding of Persian weaknesses and a clear vision of victory. Philip had even sent an advance force, led by his trusted general Parmenion, into Asia Minor years prior, establishing a beachhead and testing Persian defenses. Alexander was not starting from scratch. He was inheriting a perfectly calibrated engine of war, ready for activation. Alexander, however, put his own stamp on the preparations. While he largely followed Philip's strategic blueprint, his personal leadership and relentless drive infused the enterprise with a new, almost feverish energy. He carefully reviewed the plans, ensuring every detail, from the provisioning of his troops to the training of new recruits, was perfected. His army, approximately 42,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry strong, was a marvel of organization. It included the veteran Macedonian phalangites with their fearsome sarissas, the elite companion cavalry, light cavalry for scouting and skirmishing, archers, slingers, engineers, and even surveyors and scholars who would document the lands they conquered. This was an army, but also an expedition of exploration. The financial challenge was immense. Wars, especially long-distance invasions, are incredibly expensive. Philip had left a significant debt, and the Macedonian treasury was not overflowing. Alexander ruthlessly squeezed every available resource. He sold off much of the royal land in Macedon, almost emptying the treasury, to fund the initial stages of the invasion. This audacious gamble underscored his absolute commitment. He was literally burning his bridges, leaving no easy path for retreat. This act also showcased his conviction that victory in Persia would not only repay all debts but bring unimaginable wealth. The motivations for this grand invasion were complex, interwoven strands of history, politics, and personal ambition. For many Greeks, it was a pan-Hellenic crusade, a chance to avenge the sacrilegious destruction of Greek temples and cities by Persian King Xerxes over a century earlier. It was framed as a noble pursuit of justice, a liberation of Greek cities under Persian rule. For Philip and now Alexander, it was also a strategic imperative to eliminate Persia as a perennial threat to Macedonian and Greek stability, and to tap into the immense wealth of the East. But for Alexander himself, it was something more profound. It was a quest for personal glory, kleos, a chance to outshine his formidable father, to prove his divine favor, and perhaps to fulfill a destiny he believed was laid out for him since birth, to surpass even the legendary heroes of Homer. As the final preparations were made, a palpable sense of anticipation hung in the air. The massive army gathered at Pella, then marched towards the Hellespont, the narrow strait that separated Europe from Asia. Commanders gave final instructions, soldiers sharpened their blades, and the campfires flickered with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Many knew this was a journey from which they might never return. They were embarking on the greatest military adventure the world had ever seen, led by a young king who, at just 22 years old, was betting everything on conquering an empire. The moment of truth was approaching. With every logistical detail accounted for, every man and horse ready, and the sun rising over the European shore, Alexander stood poised to step onto the Asian continent. The echoes of Thebes' destruction were behind him. The vast, unknown riches and perils of Persia lay ahead. The grand design was ready to unfold. With the embers of Thebes still smoking as a grim testament to his ruthless will, and the colossal war machine of Macedon finally primed, Alexander now stood on the precipice of his grandest ambition, the invasion of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. His father, Philip, had meticulously prepared the blueprint, and Alexander had proven his absolute mastery of both politics and command. The moment had arrived to unleash this meticulously honed force upon the greatest empire the world had ever known. In the spring of 334 BCE, Alexander's formidable army, estimated at around 42,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, began its inexorable march towards the Hellespont. This was no mere military movement. It was a vast, sprawling exodus, a deliberate departure from the known world. The excitement among the troops was palpable, mingled with a stark awareness of the unprecedented undertaking. They were leaving behind their homes, their families, and the familiar landscapes of Europe, embarking on a journey into the unknown heart of Asia. The scale of the logistics alone was staggering. Legions of camp followers, engineers, quartermasters, and thousands of pack animals burdened with supplies, siege equipment, and weapons, all moving with disciplined purpose towards the narrow strait. The crossing of the Hellespont was more than just a logistical feat. For Alexander, it was an act laden with profound symbolism and ancient echoes. He deliberately chose to cross near the ancient city of Sestus, a site steeped in Greek myth and history. This was the very place where, over a century earlier, the colossal Persian king Xerxes had constructed his infamous bridge of boats to launch his invasion of Greece. Alexander sought to symbolically reverse this historical tide, not merely to cross, but to reclaim and conquer. It was a declaration that the war of vengeance for past Persian aggressions was now being carried to the heart of Asia. Upon reaching the Asian shore, Alexander performed a series of dramatic, carefully orchestrated gestures that resonated deeply with the classical Greek psyche. Leaping from his ship, even before it fully beached, he was said to have personally hurled his spear into the Asian soil, a visceral act of claiming the continent as his own by right of conquest. His first destination was not a strategic fort, but the legendary site of Troy. Here, he honored his mythical ancestor, Achilles, by making offerings at his tomb, and reportedly even engaged in a symbolic exchange of armor with Achilles' statue, taking up a shield believed to have belonged to the legendary hero. These powerful, theatrical acts were not just personal pilgrimages, they were masterstrokes of propaganda. They served to inspire his Greek allies, reminding them of their heroic lineage and the Pan-Hellenic cause. For his Macedonian troops, it reinforced their king's divine purpose and their shared destiny as modern-day heroes. To the Persians, it sent a chilling message. A new Achilles had arrived, and this time, the war would be fought on their land, with a fury unmatched. News of Alexander's audacious landing quickly spread, reaching the Persian satraps, the regional governors of the western provinces, who rapidly convened a war council at Zelaya. These were seasoned administrators and military commanders, including figures like Arsites, satrap of Phrygia, Spithridates, satrap of Lydia and Ionia, and the highly respected Greek mercenary general Memnon of Rhodes. Memnon, a brilliant strategist, advocated a cautious but devastating scorched earth policy: retreat, destroy all resources, and deny Alexander supplies, forcing him to starve or turn back. He also advised avoiding a pitched battle, relying instead on Persia's naval superiority to cut off Alexander's supply lines from the sea. However, the proud Persian satraps, particularly Arsites, contemptuously rejected Memnon's advice. They feared the destruction of their lands and were confident in their formidable cavalry. They chose instead a direct, decisive confrontation, deciding to intercept Alexander's army at the Granicus River. The Granicus River was not a particularly wide river, but its banks were deceptively treacherous. They were steep and uneven, at points muddy, making a river crossing difficult, especially under hostile fire. The Persian commanders positioned their elite cavalry, a mix of Persian, Median, and Bactrian horsemen, along the far bank, ready to meet Alexander's army as it attempted to cross. Their formidable Greek mercenary hoplites, numbering around 10,000, were placed on higher ground further back, acting as a powerful reserve that could advance once the Macedonian cavalry were entangled in the river. It was a well-chosen defensive position, designed to exploit the natural terrain and the inherent disadvantage of an attacking force attempting a river crossing. When Alexander's army arrived at the Granicus, the scene was daunting. His seasoned general, Parmenion, known for his cautious and pragmatic approach, advised against an immediate attack. He argued that crossing a river in the face of an entrenched enemy, especially late in the day as the light began to fade, was far too risky. He suggested waiting until dawn to allow the army to cross in an organized manner and deploy fully. But Alexander, driven by an almost supernatural impatience and a daring instinct for the decisive moment, dismissed Parmenion's caution. He believed that to hesitate, to betray any fear, would be to diminish the awe and terror he intended to inspire in the Persians. He saw not an obstacle, but an opportunity, a chance to strike a decisive blow immediately, to showcase his unmatched audacity. It would be a disgrace, he reportedly declared, his eyes fixed on the enemy lines, if, after having crossed the Hellespont, we should be afraid of a paltry stream. Alexander personally led the initial charge, a reckless display of courage that electrified his troops. He deployed his right wing, comprising the elite companion cavalry and light infantry, directly towards the river, aiming for the main Persian cavalry concentrations. It was a chaotic, brutal, and incredibly dangerous crossing. Macedonian horsemen plunged into the rapid current, struggling to maintain formation and gain purchase on the slippery, uneven banks as a hail of arrows, javelins, and slingshot stones rained down from the Persian side. As the first wave emerged, they were met immediately by the formidable Persian cavalry in desperate hand-to-hand combat. Horses stumbled, men were unseated, and the river itself became a chaotic killing ground. The battle raged with intense, personal ferocity. Alexander, distinguishable by his gleaming white helmet with its two large plumes, plunged directly into the thickest fighting, a whirlwind of steel and daring. His recklessness almost cost him his life multiple times. At one point, a Persian noble named Spithridates, the satrap of Lydia, raised his battle axe for a killing blow, only for Cletus the Black, one of Alexander's most loyal and devoted companions, to intervene at the last possible second, severing Spithridates' arm before the axe could fall. Alexander himself, with stunning personal prowess, slew several other Persian commanders, including Mithridates and Rosaces, in single combat, further inspiring his men. The sheer ferocity and visible, personal leadership of Alexander, combined with the unparalleled discipline and training of the companion cavalry, slowly but inexorably began to turn the tide. As more Macedonian units, including sections of the disciplined phalanx, finally gained stable footing and pushed across the river, the Persian cavalry, despite their bravery and initial numerical superiority, began to waver under the relentless, organized pressure. Once the Macedonian line was firmly established on the Asian bank, the Persian cavalry, disheartened and outmaneuvered, broke and fled. The Greek mercenaries, positioned further back on the rise, watched in horror as their Persian allies melted away. Surrounded and left completely exposed, they formed a square, hoping their discipline and reputation might allow them to negotiate terms. But Alexander, viewing them as traitors to the Hellenic cause for fighting alongside the Persians, showed them no mercy. He launched a brutal, relentless assault, ordering his men to attack them without quarter. A systematic massacre ensued. Nearly all of the 10,000 Greek mercenaries were cut down, slaughtered on the spot, with only a few thousand surviving to be sent in chains to forced labor in Macedon, a chilling message to any Greek considering fighting for Persia. The Battle of the Granicus River was a resounding, overwhelming victory for Alexander. Though relatively small in terms of the vastness of the Persian Empire, its psychological and strategic impact was immense. It confirmed Alexander's audacious military genius and his personal bravery. It shattered the myth of Persian invincibility in Asia Minor, demonstrating that their forces could be defeated on their own soil. This victory immediately secured Alexander's crucial foothold on the continent, opening the gates of the wealthy Greek cities along the Asian coast. More importantly, it sent an unmistakable, chilling message to the Persian Empire and to the world. Their new adversary was not just an ambitious king, but a daring, ruthless, and utterly determined conqueror who led from the front, feared no obstacle, and would show no quarter to those who stood against his grand design. The path into the heart of Asia Minor now lay firmly open before him. With the decisive victory at the Granicus River, the gates to Asia Minor swung open. Alexander's immediate objective was to secure the western coastline, dismantling Persian naval bases and preventing the powerful Persian fleet from cutting off his supply lines or stirring up rebellion in Greece. But his campaign in Anatolia was not just a military march. It was a carefully orchestrated political and ideological operation, designed to portray him as a liberator, not merely a new overlord. This phase of his conquest would reveal the complex duality of Alexander's purpose. Was he truly freeing the Greek cities from Persian tyranny, or was he simply replacing one master with another, a conqueror cloaked in the rhetoric of liberation? His initial strategy was to move south along the Aegean coast, systematically taking control of the Greek cities scattered across Ionia, Lydia, and Caria. His approach to these cities was calculated. To many, especially the democracies, he was indeed a liberator. Upon entering cities like Sardis, the ancient capital of Lydia, Alexander was welcomed. The Persian satrap surrendered the city and its vast treasury without a fight. Alexander, in a shrewd political move, restored the Lydians' traditional laws and established a local administration, showing respect for existing customs rather than imposing outright Macedonian rule immediately. He also sent the city's accumulated wealth back to Greece to fund his campaign, ensuring continued support. His entry into Ephesus was met with wild jubilation. The Ephesians, like many Greek cities under Persian control, had been subject to heavy taxes and often ruled by pro-Persian tyrants. Alexander declared all the Greek cities of Asia Minor free, ending their tribute payments to Persia and abolishing the oligarchies and tyrannies that had served Persian interests. He often restored democratic governments, a popular move that rallied many to his side. He abolished many forms of taxes and instead demanded contributions for his war effort. This approach allowed him to leverage existing anti-Persian sentiment, portraying himself as the champion of Hellenic freedom. It also undermined the Persian claim to legitimate rule and secured a network of friendly bases along the coast. However, Alexander's liberation came with conditions. While granting nominal freedom and local governance, he still demanded loyalty, resources, and the stationing of Macedonian garrisons. He replaced Persian satraps with his own trusted generals, effectively imposing a new, albeit Greek-speaking, authority. The freedom was largely from Persia, not from Alexander. This nuanced approach sowed the seeds of the Liberator or Conqueror debate that would follow his entire career. Not all cities welcomed him. The coastal strongholds with powerful Persian garrisons or those influenced by the formidable Greek mercenary general Memnon of Rhodes proved more resistant. Memnon, the same strategist who had advised the Persian satraps at Granicus to adopt a scorched earth policy, was proving to be a highly capable and dangerous adversary. He recognized the threat Alexander posed and effectively employed a strategy of delaying tactics and naval resistance. One of the first significant challenges after the Granicus came at Miletus, a vital port city. The Persian fleet, though battered at Granicus, was still a powerful force and attempted to use Miletus as a base to block Alexander. Alexander knew he needed to deny the Persians any naval strongholds on the Aegean coast. He famously decided not to engage the Persian fleet in a pitched naval battle, despite having a smaller fleet himself. Instead, he employed a brilliant strategy. He rapidly besieged Miletus from land, using siege engines to smash its walls and prevent any Persian reinforcements from landing. His logic was that if he could capture all the coastal cities, the Persian fleet would have no harbors, no resupply points, and would effectively become useless. Miletus fell after a swift siege, securing an important harbor for Alexander and marking the beginning of his strategy to neutralize the Persian navy by land. The next major obstacle was the heavily fortified city of Halicarnassus, the capital of Caria. This was no quick capitulation. Halicarnassus was under the command of Memnon of Rhodes, who had fortified it expertly. The city boasted formidable walls, deep moats, and strong Persian and mercenary garrisons. The siege of Halicarnassus became one of Alexander's most challenging early tests, stretching for months and demonstrating his relentless determination. The fighting was fierce and bloody, with multiple Macedonian assaults repulsed. Alexander himself was wounded during the siege, a testament to the intensity of the struggle and his personal involvement on the front lines. Despite the heavy casualties and the skillful defense, Alexander's persistence eventually broke the city. Memnon managed to escape by sea with much of his forces, but Halicarnassus fell, its fortifications demolished. The protracted siege showed the world that even the most formidable defenses would eventually yield to Alexander's will and his superior siegecraft. As Alexander pushed deeper into Phrygia, an ancient kingdom within Asia Minor, he encountered one of the most famous legends of his early campaign, the Gordian knot. In the city of Gordium, a prophecy stated that whoever could untie the impossibly intricate knot, tying an ox cart to its yoke, would become the ruler of Asia. For centuries, Kings and ambitious men had attempted the feat and failed. It was seen as a divine sign, a test of destiny. Alexander, faced with this challenge, approached it with his characteristic blend of pragmatism and bold, unconventional thinking. Instead of painstakingly attempting to untie the complex knot, he drew his sword and, with one swift, decisive stroke, simply cut it in half. The act was profoundly symbolic. It was a literal cutting through of a seemingly intractable problem, an embodiment of Alexander's decisive, direct approach to challenges. It immediately fulfilled the prophecy, not by following the rules, but by rewriting them. It cemented his image as the destined ruler of Asia, chosen by the gods. It also signaled his impatience with convention and his readiness to forge his own path to destiny. The Gordian knot incident became a powerful story, underscoring Alexander's unique leadership style and divine favor in the eyes of his men and the world. As Alexander continued his sweep through Asia Minor, he was consistently faced with the question, was he a liberator or a conqueror? For the Greeks, he largely delivered on the promise of liberation from Persian rule, granting autonomy and ending tribute. However, he always maintained a strong hand, ensuring that their freedom served his larger strategic goals. For the non-Greek populations, like the Lydians or Carians, he was undeniably a conqueror, albeit one who often respected local customs and administrations, so long as they submitted to his ultimate authority and contributed to his war effort. He left his generals and administrators, often Macedonians, in charge of these regions, effectively integrating them into a new, burgeoning empire that was still very much under his direct command. By the end of his campaign in Asia Minor, Alexander had achieved all his immediate objectives. He had secured the vital coastline, neutralized the Persian naval threat in the Aegean, and established a secure base of operations. He had amassed significant wealth from captured treasuries to fund his ongoing campaign and had, through a mixture of diplomacy and brutal force, brought much of western Anatolia under his control. The path was now clear for the next, far more ambitious phase of his grand design, moving inland, deeper into the vast heart of the Persian Empire, to confront its very ruler, Darius III. Having secured the western coastline of Asia Minor and solidified his image as a powerful, albeit ruthless, liberator, Alexander pressed deeper into Persian territory. His campaign led him through the rugged mountains of Cilicia, a strategically vital region. As he approached the city of Tarsus, a sudden, near-fatal illness struck him down. It was a perilous moment. The life of the young king hung in the balance, a stark reminder of his mortality amidst his grand ambitions. His physician, Philip of Acarnania, risked his own life to administer a cure, and Alexander, trusting him implicitly, recovered. This brush with death only seemed to deepen his resolve, reinforcing his belief in his destiny. Meanwhile, news of Alexander's relentless advance and the defeats suffered by his satraps had finally galvanized the supreme ruler of the Achaemenid Empire, Darius III. Darius was not just a king. He was the king of kings, ruler of an empire so vast it stretched from the Aegean to India, commanding unimaginable wealth and manpower. The humiliation at Granicus, largely a defeat of his satraps, demanded a personal response. Darius decided to lead his forces himself, mustering an army of truly colossal proportions, a force so immense that ancient sources claim it numbered in the hundreds of thousands, perhaps even 1 million, though modern historians estimate it more realistically in the range of 100,000 to 250,000 men. This was to be the decisive encounter, a crushing blow to repel the audacious Macedonian invaders. Darius's initial movements were unexpected. He marched his vast army through the Syrian gates, a narrow pass, and maneuvered around Alexander's forces, cutting off Alexander's supply lines from the rear. Alexander, having marched south along the coast expecting to meet Darius on the broad plains near Anch, suddenly found himself behind Darius's colossal army. It was a moment of acute danger. Darius had effectively placed his immense force between Alexander and his lines of communication. Alexander, initially disbelieving the reports, quickly realized the perilous situation. His army was potentially trapped, cut off, and facing a numerically superior enemy on unfavorable ground. However, Darius, driven by pride and perhaps a fatal misunderstanding of Alexander's tactics, made a critical strategic error. Instead of remaining on the wide, open plains where his overwhelming numerical superiority, particularly his vast cavalry, could be fully utilized, he marched his entire army into the plain of Issus. This narrow coastal plain, roughly 1.5 to 2 miles wide, was hemmed in by the Pinaris River on one side and the towering Amunus Mountains on the other. It was a geographical bottleneck that would negate Darius's vast numerical advantage, particularly his cavalry, making it impossible for him to deploy his entire front line or outflank Alexander. It was, in essence, a Macedonian dream battlefield, reducing the struggle to a frontal clash where discipline and leadership could overcome sheer numbers. On the morning of the battle, Alexander marched his army back north, towards Darius. As his forces emerged from the Pillars of Jonah Pass and saw the immense Persian host arrayed before them, the sheer scale was daunting. Alexander carefully deployed his forces. On his crucial right wing, nearest the mountains, he placed his elite companion cavalry, light infantry, and archers, personally taking command. His veteran Macedonian phalanx, the heart of his army, formed the center, their long sarissas bristling like an invincible hedge of pikes. On the left wing, positioned along the coast where the ground was more open and threatened by Persian cavalry, he placed the Thessalian cavalry and his Greek-allied infantry under the command of the ever-reliable Parmenion. The Persian deployment was equally massive but less effective given the terrain. Darius positioned his best cavalry, numbering in the tens of thousands, on the open ground along the coast opposite Parmenion. In the very center, guarding the Pinaris River, stood his crack Greek mercenary hoplites, the most disciplined infantry in his army, flanked by masses of Persian infantry. Darius himself commanded from the center, atop his war chariot, surrounded by his immortals and royal guard, a symbolic but vulnerable position. The Battle of Issus began with Alexander's characteristic audacity. Seeing the Persian line stretched thin in places due to the cramped terrain, and recognizing the critical importance of breaking the enemy center, Alexander launched a ferocious, almost suicidal charge with his companion cavalry. He galloped directly towards the Pinaris River, aiming straight for the heart of the Persian line where Darius was positioned. This wasn't merely an attack, it was a psychological weapon. Alexander intended to kill or capture Darius himself. The sight of the Macedonian king, identifiable by his famous helmet and fearless presence, leading such a charge sent shockwaves through the Persian ranks. The crossing of the Pinaris River proved difficult for the Macedonian phalanx. The uneven riverbed and the Persian resistance caused some units to lose cohesion, creating gaps in their line. For a time, the battle in the center became a desperate, grueling struggle. The Persian-Greek mercenaries fought with exceptional courage and skill, pushing back parts of the Macedonian phalanx in a bloody, close-quarters slugfest. On the far left, Parmenian's forces faced immense pressure from the overwhelming Persian cavalry along the coast. It was a furious, desperate fight, with the Macedonian left flank pushed perilously close to the sea. But Alexander's charge on the right proved decisive. Leading his companions, he smashed through the Persian left wing, then wheeled inwards, driving directly into the Persian center. The sheer momentum and ferocity of his attack, coupled with the collapse of the Persian left flank, created immense pressure on Darius's central position. Suddenly, facing Alexander's personal charge and seeing his royal guard being cut down around him, Darius III panicked. His nerve broke. In a moment that would seal the fate of his empire, the King of Kings turned his chariot and fled the battlefield, abandoning his army and his family. Darius's flight was the ultimate turning point. The sight of their emperor abandoning them shattered the morale of the vast Persian army. What had been a desperate struggle instantly devolved into a chaotic, desperate rout. Alexander, with a strategic calculation that belied his previous recklessness, abandoned the general slaughter of the fleeing Persian masses to pursue Darius. He knew that capturing the king was the ultimate prize, the symbolic end of the war. Though Darius ultimately escaped, his chariot, bow, and cloak were captured, tangible symbols of his flight. The aftermath of Issus was a scene of utter devastation for the Persians. Their casualties were astronomical, likely tens of thousands, perhaps even over 100,000, as their massive army became a panicked mob, trampling each other in the narrow passes. Macedonian losses were remarkably light, a testament to their discipline and Alexander's strategy. The spoils were unimaginable. The entire Persian camp, overflowing with incredible riches, fell into Alexander's hands. Jewels, gold, luxurious tents, and vast quantities of supplies were seized. Most significantly, Darius's entire family, his mother, Sisygambis, his wife, Statare, and his daughters, were captured. This was a moment of immense psychological victory. Alexander treated them with surprising and unprecedented respect, ensuring their safety and dignity, a stark contrast to the usual brutal treatment of royal captives. This act not only showcased his chivalry but also shrewdly undermined Darius's prestige, as his own family was now beholden to his enemy's kindness. The Battle of Issus was a triumph of tactical brilliance over overwhelming numbers, a testament to Alexander's audacious leadership and the unparalleled discipline of his army. It shattered Darius III's prestige and demonstrated beyond doubt that Alexander was a force destined not just to defeat, but to conquer the Persian Empire. The path south, towards the rich coastal cities of Phoenicia, Syria, and the ancient land of Egypt, now lay open, inviting the next chapter of Alexander's grand design. The dust had barely settled on the blood-soaked plain of Issus, and Darius III, the great king of Persia, was in full flight, abandoning his family and his empire's heartland to Alexander. Many of Alexander's generals, sensing the ultimate prize, urged immediate pursuit of the fleeing emperor, believing the war could be ended then and there. But Alexander, with a strategic vision that transcended mere battle, made a decision that revealed his profound understanding of power and logistics. He turned south. His gaze was fixed on the wealthy, defiant coastal cities of Phoenicia, particularly the legendary island stronghold of Tyre. Alexander understood that despite the land victory at Issus, the Persian Empire still possessed a powerful fleet. This fleet, operating from bases along the Mediterranean coast, posed a constant threat. It could ferry reinforcements, disrupt his meticulously planned supply lines stretching back to Macedon, or even incite rebellions in Greece. To neutralize this naval threat and secure his rear before venturing deeper into the Persian heartland, Alexander needed to control every significant port. Tyre, with its seemingly impregnable defenses and vital strategic position, was the linchpin. Tyre was no ordinary city. It was an ancient, fabulously wealthy Phoenician trading hub, famous for its purple dye, its vast merchant fleet, and its unique geography. The main city lay not on the mainland, but on a rocky island situated about half a mile, 800 meters, off the coast. It was surrounded by colossal walls, some reportedly as high as 150 feet, 45 meters, rising sheer from the sea. Its harbors were constantly active, filled with the ships of a powerful Tyrian navy. From a military standpoint, Tyre was considered unassailable, a fortress that had withstood sieges for centuries, notably a 13-year siege by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II. When Alexander arrived, he initially offered a diplomatic solution. He requested entry to the city to make a sacrifice to Melkart, the Tyrian patron deity, whom he equated with Heracles, one of his own divine ancestors. This was a polite, religious request that would have signaled Tyrian submission. But the Tyrians, confident in their island's impregnability and their powerful fleet, flatly refused. They offered him gifts but declared that his army could not enter their city. This defiance, for Alexander, was an unacceptable challenge to his authority, especially in the wake of Issus. He would not leave such a powerful bastion unsubdued in his rear. His determination hardened. He famously declared that he would conquer Tyre, even if it must be by building a mole to it. Thus began one of the most epic and desperate sieges in ancient history, the construction of the mole, a causeway or land bridge. To reach the island city, Alexander commanded his engineers and soldiers to build a massive stone and timber causeway directly across the half-mile strait. This was an undertaking of colossal proportions, a feat of engineering that seemed to defy the very laws of nature and ancient capability. Thousands of laborious, both soldiers and local conscripts, toiled relentlessly, quarrying stone, felling trees, and dumping earth into the shallow waters. The Tyrians, however, were no passive observers. Their powerful triremes and swift galleys constantly harassed the mole's construction, launching devastating raids on the Macedonian workers, firing arrows and launching javelins. They even employed ingenious tactics, such as fire ships loaded with burning pitch and sulfur, which they sent crashing into the causeway, destroying weeks of labor in moments. Progress was agonizingly slow, costly, and dangerous. Alexander, frustrated but unyielding, even personally participated in some of the defensive actions on the mole, rallying his men and demonstrating his personal commitment. Recognizing that the mole alone might not be enough, and that the Tyrian fleet was their true strength, Alexander adopted a two-pronged strategy. He began to assemble his own navy. He leveraged his newfound control over the Phoenician mainland cities, Sidon, Byblos, Arwed, whose fleets had formerly served Persia but now cautiously pledged allegiance to him. He also summoned ships from Cyprus, Rhodes, and other Greek islands, quickly amassing a formidable armada. This combined fleet, now superior in numbers and skill, finally engaged and defeated the Tyrian navy, breaking their blockade and allowing Alexander to protect his mole and approach the city from the sea. With his navy controlling the seas and the mole finally nearing completion, Alexander launched the final, devastating assault. He brought up massive siege towers, some reportedly 150 feet high, armed with catapults and stone throwers, transporting them directly to the walls along the completed causeway. Under a barrage of projectiles, his forces breached the walls. The fighting that ensued was a brutal, bloody street-by-street massacre. The aftermath of Tyre's fall was a horrifying testament to Alexander's unyielding determination and his capacity for extreme cruelty when defied. For their stubborn resistance and for the lives lost during the grueling 7-month siege, Alexander showed no mercy. Approximately 8,000 Tyrian fighting men were massacred on the spot. Of the remaining population, an estimated 30,000 men, women, and children were sold into slavery. And, in a chilling act designed to terrorize any future rebels, Alexander ordered the public crucifixion of 2,000 Tyrian men along the city's coastline. It was a calculated act of retribution, a horrifying message etched in blood: defy Alexander, and suffer absolute, total destruction. With Tyre obliterated, the path to Egypt now lay open, but one last formidable obstacle remained: Gaza. Situated on a high mound overlooking the desert, Gaza was another ancient city, strategically vital as the last major stronghold before the Sinai Desert and the gateway to Egypt. Its commander, Battus, was a eunuch of immense courage and loyalty to Darius. He had learned from Tyre's fate and was determined to resist to the last man. Gaza's walls were formidable, its position naturally strong, and the surrounding desert terrain made siege operations incredibly difficult. Alexander faced another prolonged and difficult siege. The Macedonian army had to build another massive siege ramp to reach the city's towering defenses. The resistance was fierce, and Alexander, leading from the front as always, was again severely wounded during the assault, struck in the shoulder by an arrow. This personal injury further fueled his rage and resolve. After a siege lasting several months, Gaza, too, eventually fell to the relentless Macedonian onslaught. The fate of Gaza was as brutal, if not more so, than Tyre. The entire male population was massacred. The women and children were sold into slavery. Battus, the defiant commander, was subjected to a particularly cruel and archaic punishment. Alexander, in a moment of vengeful fury, reportedly had Battus dragged alive by a chariot around the city walls, mimicking Achilles' treatment of Hector. This act was seen even by some of Alexander's own men as excessively cruel. But for Alexander, it was a symbolic act of ultimate humiliation for an enemy who dared to defy him to the very end. It was also a final, grim warning to Egypt: surrender peacefully, or face the same horrifying fate. The sieges of Tyre and Gaza were crucial turning points, showcasing Alexander as the unyielding conqueror. They demonstrated his unparalleled determination, his brilliant engineering capabilities, and his utter ruthlessness when faced with defiance. He would suffer no obstacles, tolerate no resistance, and allow no strategic loose ends. With the entire Mediterranean coastline of the Levant now firmly under his control, Alexander had secured his lines of communication, neutralized the Persian naval threat, and opened the final land route to the ancient and wealthy land of Egypt. Having brutally secured the entire Phoenician coast, leaving behind a trail of destruction that solidified his reputation as an unyielding conqueror, Alexander's strategic path now led him directly to the ancient land of Egypt. After the bloody, protracted sieges of Tyre and Gaza, the Macedonian army was prepared for another grueling struggle. However, Egypt's fate would be starkly different. This land, a cradle of civilization, would not meet Alexander with resistance but with an eager, almost joyous welcome. For centuries, Egypt had been under the oppressive rule of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. The Persians, followers of Zoroastrianism, had often disrespected Egyptian traditions, desecrated temples, and imposed heavy taxes and harsh rule. They were seen as foreign overlords, not legitimate pharaohs. The Egyptian people, weary of this subjugation, longed for a liberator. Alexander, arriving after his decisive victories over the Persian forces, appeared to them as a prophesied deliverer. The satrap of Egypt, Mazias, seeing the overwhelming might of Alexander's army and the futility of resistance after Tyre and Gaza, wisely chose to surrender the entire province without a fight. Alexander's entry into Egypt in late 332 BCE was therefore a peaceful triumph. He was greeted not as an invading conqueror, but as a liberator, a redeemer. This immediate acceptance provided a crucial psychological boost, allowing his army to rest and regroup after the brutal campaigns, and offering him the time and resources to consolidate his rule over this immensely wealthy and strategically vital territory. His first major act in Egypt showcased his strategic genius and his visionary understanding of urban planning. He journeyed to the western branch of the Nile Delta, a prime location between the Mediterranean Sea and Lake Merotis. Here, he personally sketched out the plans for a new city, a city that would become one of the most famous and enduring legacies of his empire, Alexandria. The location was chosen with meticulous foresight. Its two natural harbors provided excellent anchorage, it was protected by the Nile from silting, and it offered a perfect defensible position. Alexander envisioned Alexandria not just as a military base, but as a vibrant center of trade, a crossroads of civilizations, and a beacon of Hellenistic culture and learning that would endure for millennia. Though he would never see its completion, Alexandria quickly became the intellectual and commercial heart of the Hellenistic world, a testament to his foresight. But for Alexander, Egypt offered more than strategic ports and fertile lands. It presented a unique opportunity for divine validation. He embarked on a perilous, almost mystical journey deep into the western desert, across the vast, unforgiving sands of the Libyan desert, to reach the remote oracle of Amun at Siwa oasis. His motivation was complex, part genuine spiritual quest, part shrewd political calculation. He sought divine confirmation of his destiny, to legitimize his rule in the eyes of his own men, the Egyptians, and indeed the world, as a truly sacred monarch. The journey to Siwa was fraught with danger. The small expedition, accompanied by guides and a select few companions, faced the brutal heat, the treacherous sandstorms, and the constant threat of getting lost in the featureless desert. Legend says that they were guided by ravens, or perhaps by a sudden, providential rainstorm that filled their water skins, signs interpreted as divine favor. This perilous trek only intensified the mystical aura surrounding Alexander's quest. Upon reaching the verdant oasis of Siwa, Alexander was ushered into the inner sanctum of the Temple of Amun. What transpired within the hallowed walls remains one of history's great mysteries, preserved largely through the accounts of later historians. The chief priest of Amun, addressing Alexander, reportedly hailed him not as King Alexander, but as son of Amun, or son of Zeus, as Amun was equated with the Greek king of the gods. The exact words are debated, but the core message was clear. The oracle confirmed Alexander's divine parentage. He was not merely a mortal king, but a god king, a legitimate pharaoh in the eyes of the Egyptians, and a divinely favored son of Zeus or Amun in the eyes of the Greeks. This pronouncement had a profound impact on Alexander's self-perception. Already convinced of his unique destiny, the oracle's declaration seemed to confirm his innermost beliefs. It solidified his image as a divine ruler, setting him apart from ordinary mortals and even from his own father, Philip. While some of his Macedonian companions might have found the idea of their king being a son of a god a bit unsettling, for the Egyptians, it was the ultimate stamp of legitimacy, linking him to the long line of pharaohs. It also boosted his confidence, perhaps even to the point of fostering a sense of invincibility that would fuel his relentless pursuit of world conquest. Alexander spent very little time on the actual administration of Egypt. He skillfully navigated the country's complex religious and administrative landscape. Unlike the Persians, he showed deep respect for Egyptian customs and religion, making offerings to their gods and allowing their priests to resume their traditional roles. He appointed Egyptians to key religious positions and even some local administrative roles, a stark contrast to the Persian practice of imposing foreign governors. However, the overall military command and strategic oversight remained firmly in the hands of his Macedonian and Greek generals. He effectively decentralized the administration, setting up separate commands for the military, civil administration, and tax collection, ensuring no single official could accumulate too much power, thereby preventing future rebellions. Alexander's time in Egypt, though brief, approximately 6 months, was transformative for both him and the country. It solidified his image as a universal monarch, legitimized by both Greek and Egyptian deities. He left Egypt stable, prosperous, and firmly under his control, a crucial base for future operations. With the western flank of his growing empire secure, and his divine status seemingly confirmed, Alexander's gaze once again turned eastward. Darius III, the King of Kings, was now gathering his forces for a final, decisive confrontation on the vast plains of Mesopotamia, a battle that would determine the fate of the Persian Empire and Alexander's place in history. After consolidating his power in Egypt, Alexander embarked on his most audacious march yet. His destination was the sprawling plains of Mesopotamia, the ancient cradle of civilization, where Darius III had chosen to make his ultimate stand. This was to be the battle, the final, climactic showdown that would determine the fate of the Achaemenid Empire and, indeed, the entire known world. Darius, having twice fled from Alexander's fury, once at Issus, abandoning his family, understood that his very throne, his dynasty, and the future of Persia hinged on this single encounter. He had spent the intervening 2 years not just rebuilding his army, but meticulously planning every aspect of this engagement, determined to correct past mistakes and crush the audacious Macedonian. Darius had chosen his battlefield with meticulous care, a vast, flat plain near a village called Gaugamela, meaning the camel's house, not far from ancient Nineveh. Unlike the narrow defiles of Issus that had negated his numerical superiority, Gaugamela offered boundless space where his immense cavalry and terrifying scythed chariots could be deployed to their fullest devastating effect. He had gone further, ordering the plain to be deliberately cleared of any irregularities and even flattened in places, to ensure maximum mobility for his chariots and massed cavalry. He also reportedly concealed sharp wooden stakes and caltrops, metal spikes designed to maim horses, beneath the churned earth in the expected path of Alexander's cavalry, a sinister trap waiting to be sprung. This was to be a battle won by overwhelming numbers, brute force, and the sheer momentum of his colossal army. As Alexander's army marched for weeks across the baking plains of Mesopotamia, he maintained his customary vigilance. Scouts ranged far ahead, meticulously charting the terrain and gathering intelligence on Darius's preparations. Alexander understood the immense stakes. His entire expedition, his life's work, hinged on this one battle. On the night before the battle, Parmenion, ever cautious and pragmatic, advised Alexander to launch a surprise night attack on the Persian camp, believing it would throw their vast, unwieldy army into disarray. But Alexander famously refused. He declared that he would not steal a victory like a thief. He wanted a clear, decisive, and honorable triumph, one that would leave no doubt about his rightful conquest. He wished to win by superior generalship and the bravery of his men, not by subterfuge. He intended to fight a king's battle, ensuring that his victory would be seen as a divine mandate, not a lucky ambush. The dawn of October 1st, 331 BCE, broke over a scene of truly epic proportions. Stretching across the immense plain, as far as the eye could see, was Darius's colossal host. Ancient sources exaggerate wildly, claiming up to 1,000,000 men, but even conservative modern estimates place his numbers at 100,000 to 250,000, vastly outnumbering Alexander's approximately 47,000 Macedonians and Greeks. The Persian army was a kaleidoscope of nations, heavily armored cavalry from Bactria and Scythia, archers from the steppes, fearsome Indian elephants, foot soldiers from every corner of the empire, and crucially, 200 scythed chariots, wheeled vehicles armed with razor-sharp blades designed to tear through infantry formations. In the very center, resplendent in his golden chariot and surrounded by his elite immortals, sat Darius III, a living symbol of the vast Achaemenid Empire. Alexander's deployment was a stroke of unparalleled tactical genius, a brilliant counter to Darius's overwhelming numbers and anticipated envelopment. He utilized a sophisticated oblique order, or refused flank, combined with a cunning hollow square formation for his phalanx. He personally commanded his elite companion cavalry on the extreme right wing, reinforced by light infantry and archers. To his left, the Macedonian phalanx formed the impenetrable center, but Alexander instructed them to prepare for an unprecedented maneuver, to form a defensive rear or flank if outflanked, by wheeling sections of the phalanx to face outwards, a testament to their rigorous training and discipline. On the far left, Parmenion commanded the Thessalian cavalry and Greek allied infantry, facing the strongest part of the Persian cavalry. The battle began with a masterstroke of deception. Alexander, rather than charging directly, began to move his entire right wing diagonally to the right, gradually drawing parallel to the Persian line. This provoked Darius, who feared being outflanked, to extend his own left wing wider and wider. This move stretched the Persian line dangerously thin and, crucially, began to pull Darius's powerful left-wing cavalry away from his center, creating the very gaps Alexander desperately sought. As the Persian cavalry on the left began to overextend, Darius unleashed his fearsome scythed chariots. Hundreds of these terrifying machines thundered across the plain, blades glinting, intended to scythe through the Macedonian phalanx and break their cohesion. But Alexander had prepared for this. At his command, the Macedonian phalanx opened its ranks, creating lanes. As the chariots rushed into these gaps, they were immediately assailed by javelins and arrows from all sides, or snagged by hidden ropes. Many were surrounded and cut down, while others simply passed harmlessly through the lines, to be dealt with by Alexander's light infantry behind the main phalanx. The great chariot charge, Darius's trump card, largely failed. Seeing the Persian line stretched and a crucial gap emerging in their center due to his feigned movements, Alexander seized the decisive moment. He ordered his companion cavalry to pivot sharply and, with a ferocious roar, launched his famous wedge-shaped charge directly into the heart of the now exposed Persian center. It was a perfectly executed maneuver, a concentrated blow aimed straight at Darius himself. The companion cavalry, irresistible in their charge, smashed through Darius's personal guard, cutting a bloody swath through the King of Kings' bodyguard. Facing Alexander's personal charge, seeing his immortals and his royal guard being cut down around him, and witnessing the collapse of his center, Darius' III's nerve broke for the second time. With his life threatened, the King of Kings turned his war chariot and fled the battlefield in a desperate, ignominious flight. His retreat, a visible act of cowardice, instantly shattered the morale of his immense army. What had been a desperate, but organized, struggle instantly devolved into a chaotic, desperate rout across the vast plain. However, the battle was not yet fully won. While Alexander drove into the Persian center, Parmenian's left flank was still under immense pressure, fighting a desperate, holding action against overwhelming Persian numbers, especially their powerful right-wing cavalry. News reached Alexander that Parmenian's wing was in dire straits, with some Persian cavalry even breaking through and looting the Macedonian camp. In a crucial and difficult decision, Alexander chose to abandon the immediate, tantalizing pursuit of Darius. He wheeled his companion cavalry and plunged back into the thick of the fight, cutting a bloody path across the battlefield to relieve Parmenion. This act, while allowing Darius to escape, demonstrated Alexander's loyalty to his men and his supreme tactical awareness to secure the overall victory. His furious charge back, cutting through elements of the Persian cavalry, turned the tide on the left flank, completing the rout. The Battle of Gaugamela was an absolute, overwhelming triumph for Alexander, a testament to his unparalleled tactical genius, his audacious leadership, and the disciplined valor of his Macedonian army. Persian casualties were astronomical, certainly in the tens of thousands, as their vast army disintegrated in a panicked flight. Macedonian losses, by contrast, were remarkably light. The spoils were immense. The entire Persian camp, including Darius's war elephants, which had been deployed but not effectively used, his personal effects, and vast quantities of treasure, fell into Alexander's hands. More importantly, Gaugamela marked the decisive fall of the Achaemenid Persian Empire as a military and political force. While Darius III remained alive, he was now a king without an army, a fugitive in his own land. Alexander was now the undisputed master of Asia. The road to the legendary Persian capitals, Babylon, Susa, and the ceremonial heart of the empire, Persepolis, lay wide open, inviting the final, symbolic acts of conquest that would forever mark Alexander as the greatest conqueror the world had ever seen. With the dust of Gaugamela settling, Alexander stood as the undisputed master of Asia. Darius III, the King of Kings, was now a king without an army, a desperate fugitive. But the immense Persian Empire, a complex tapestry of ancient cultures and vast wealth, still needed to be formally claimed. Alexander's next objective was to march into the ceremonial and administrative centers, securing the symbols of Persian power and immense treasuries that would fund his future ambitions. His path led him to 3 legendary cities, Babylon, Susa, and finally, the sacred heart of the empire, Persepolis. The march from Gaugamela to Babylon was a journey into the very cradle of civilization. Alexander approached the city not with siege engines, but with careful diplomacy. Babylon, with its fabled hanging gardens, its immense walls, and its rich history, was a cosmopolitan hub, wary of destruction. The city's Persian satrap, Mazias, the same man who had honorably surrendered Egypt to Alexander, and the chief priest of the Temple of Marduk, led the inhabitants in a peaceful surrender. Alexander's entry into Babylon in October 331 BCE was therefore a triumphant, yet bloodless, procession. He entered the city not as a brutal conqueror, but as a liberator from Persian oppression, much as he had done in Egypt. His actions in Babylon were a masterclass in political pragmatism and cultural respect. He immediately ordered the restoration of the ancient temple of Ascension, dedicated to Marduk, the city's patron deity, which Xerxes had reportedly desecrated. He also permitted the Chaldean priests to resume their traditional rights and authority, respecting the long-standing religious customs of the Babylonians. Crucially, he appointed Mazias, a Persian, as the satrap of Babylonia, a bold decision that demonstrated his willingness to incorporate Persian nobility into his administration, provided they were loyal. A Macedonian general, Bagesthenes, was appointed as the military commander of the citadel, ensuring Alexander's ultimate control. This blend of respect for local traditions and firm Macedonian oversight characterized his initial administrative approach, aiming for stability rather than forced Hellenization. The wealth encountered in Babylon was staggering, a first taste of the immense riches accumulated over centuries by the Achaemenid Empire. From Babylon, Alexander continued his march eastward to Susa, one of the administrative capitals and a favored winter residence of the Persian kings. Situated on the royal road, Susa, too, surrendered without resistance. Its treasury was immense, surpassing even that of Babylon. Here, Alexander seized an astounding 50,000 talents of silver, along with vast amounts of gold, precious jewels, and countless other treasures accumulated over centuries. Among the spoils were also objects of particular symbolic significance to the Greeks. The bronze statues of Harmodius and Aristogiton, the Athenian tyrannicides, which Xerxes had plundered from Athens over 150 years earlier. Alexander meticulously ensured their return to Athens, a powerful gesture that underscored his role as the avenger of Greece and the champion of Hellenic freedom. Susa's peaceful surrender and immense wealth further solidified his control over the heartland of the empire. The most anticipated and symbolically charged destination, however, was Persepolis. This was not merely another capital. It was the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire, the sacred city of the Achaemenid kings, built by Darius the Great and Xerxes I. It was a monumental complex of palaces, treasuries, and audience halls, carved into the mountainside, a stunning embodiment of Persian imperial power and glory. Alexander's approach to Persepolis was not easy. The direct route led through a narrow mountain pass known as the Persian Gates. Here, he encountered fierce resistance from the last bastion of Persian military might in the region, commanded by the satrap Ariobarzanes. Ariobarzanes, with a force of just a few thousand men, ingeniously fortified the pass, utilizing the rugged terrain to his advantage. He built a wall across the narrowest point and rained down boulders and projectiles on the Macedonians, inflicting significant casualties. This was a desperate, heroic last stand by the Persians on their own soil. For a moment, Alexander's advance was halted. But Alexander, never one to be completely thwarted, learned of a goat track around the pass from a local shepherd. In a daring maneuver reminiscent of Leonidas at Thermopylae, but with roles reversed, he led a small, elite force on a perilous night march through the mountains. While Parmenion kept the Persians engaged at the front, Alexander's contingent appeared in their rear, encircling and annihilating Ariobarzanes' forces. The Persian gates were breached, and the path to Persepolis lay open. Alexander entered Persepolis in January 330 BCE. The very act of marching into the sacred city, the heart of the empire that had threatened Greece for so long, was laden with profound emotional and symbolic weight for his Greek and Macedonian soldiers. After allowing his troops to plunder the city's private homes, though protecting the royal palaces and treasury for himself, Alexander then made a fateful decision that would forever be debated. He ordered the burning of the royal palace of Persepolis. The fire of Persepolis remains one of the most controversial acts of Alexander's career. Ancient accounts offer differing explanations. Some claim it was a spontaneous act, instigated during a drunken revel by the Athenian courtesan Tyre, who urged Alexander to burn the palace as an act of revenge for Xerxes' destruction of Athens and the Greek temples during the Persian Wars. Others suggest it was a calculated political statement, soberly considered by Alexander. This view argues that by destroying the very symbol of Achaemenid power and legitimacy, Alexander was sending an unmistakable message that the Persian Empire, as it had existed, was utterly and irrevocably finished. It was a final, cathartic act of vengeance for generations of Greek suffering, a symbolic obliteration of the old order, ensuring no legitimate Persian king could ever again claim the ceremonial throne from Persepolis. While not every structure was razed, the principal palaces, the heart of the Achaemenid ceremonial complex, were utterly consumed by flames, their magnificent columns toppled, their elaborate reliefs shattered. The destruction was extensive and deliberate, marking the definitive end of the Achaemenid dynasty in the eyes of the world. The wealth seized from Persepolis was staggering beyond comprehension. The royal treasury contained an estimated 120,000 talents of silver and gold, an amount so vast it took thousands of mules and 500 camels to transport. This incredible hoard provided Alexander with the financial resources to fund not only the remainder of his existing campaign, but any future ambitions for years to come. The conquest of the Persian capitals, Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, marked a pivotal turning point in Alexander's campaign. He had not only defeated the Persian army, he had absorbed its symbols of power, seized its immense wealth, and, through the destruction of Persepolis, symbolically annihilated the old empire. Alexander was now unquestionably the de facto ruler of the vast Persian dominion. Yet, even as he consolidated his new conquests and began to integrate their structures into his burgeoning empire, the former king of kings, Darius III, remained at large, a living challenge to Alexander's complete supremacy. The ultimate hunt for the fleeing monarch was about to begin, taking Alexander further into the remote, challenging eastern satrapies of the empire. With the opulent palaces of Persepolis reduced to smoldering ruins, Alexander's dominion over the central heartland of the former Achaemenid Persian Empire was, in a very tangible sense, complete. He now controlled its immense wealth, its administrative structures, and its symbolic centers of power. Yet, a crucial, unsettling loose end persisted, a living phantom of the old order. Darius III was still alive and at large. As long as Darius, the rightful king of kings, breathed, he remained a legitimate, albeit pathetic, claimant to the Persian throne, a potential rallying point for continued resistance, and a thorn in Alexander's side that prevented the full and undisputed legitimization of his own nascent empire. For Alexander, his claim to Asia could only be absolute if Darius publicly submitted, or was definitively removed from the stage of history. Thus, the relentless, grueling hunt began, driving Alexander and his army into the vast, untamed reaches of the eastern satrapies. Alexander's obsession with capturing Darius was palpable, almost visceral, pushing his army to its breaking point. His personal ambition, intertwined with the desire for vengeance for Greece and the fulfillment of his burgeoning divine mandate, fueled a pace that few could endure. He drove his elite cavalry and a select force of infantry on a series of forced marches across immense, unforgiving terrains, the desolate plains of Parthia and the rugged mountains of Hyrcania. The conditions were brutal beyond measure, scorching desert heat that shimmered off endless sands, choking dust storms that reduced visibility to nothing, long, desperate stretches without water, and the immense logistical nightmare of supplying an army moving at such breakneck speed, far from any established base. Baggage was often left behind, men pushed beyond exhaustion, and horses ridden to collapse. Alexander himself, ever the leader by example, shared every hardship, marching on foot with his infantry and enduring the same privations as his men. He understood that every day Darius remained free, the more time he had to raise new forces from the fierce, independent eastern provinces, prolonging the war indefinitely and undermining Alexander's claim to absolute authority. Darius, meanwhile, was a king in utter desperation, a hollow symbol of his former glory. He fled through Ecbatana, modern Hamadan, another ancient Persian capital, gathering what meager forces he could, a disparate mix of loyalists and unwilling conscripts from the distant eastern provinces, particularly the fierce horsemen from Bactria and Sogdiana. His authority, however, was rapidly eroding. 2 humiliating flights from battlefields, the capture of his family, and his inability to stem the Macedonian tide had shattered his prestige. His powerful eastern satraps, particularly Bessus, the satrap of Bactria and a distant relative of Darius, watched his plight with growing contempt. Bessus, a proud and ambitious nobleman, saw Darius as not merely weak, but a shameful, cowardly liability unfit to rule. He harbored his own designs, to seize power for himself, declare himself the new king, and rally the remaining Persian forces to resist Alexander on his own terms. The inevitable conspiracy against Darius began to crystallize within his own dwindling, increasingly fractious entourage. Bessus, alongside other high-ranking nobles like Nabazanes, the Chiliarch, or commander of 1,000, and Bazaentes, the satrap of Arachosia and Drangiana, openly plotted to depose the emperor. Their motives were complex and varied. Some genuinely believed that a new, more aggressive leader was needed. Others simply sought to secure their own positions in the face of inevitable defeat. Some might have even considered handing Darius over to Alexander to gain favor, though Bessus's ultimate ambition quickly became clear. As Alexander relentlessly closed in, crossing the Caspian Gates, a narrow and vital pass, the conspirators put their plan into action. They seized Darius, chaining him and placing him in an ox cart, intending to either present him to Alexander or keep him as a pawn to negotiate their own ascendancy. Alexander, receiving intelligence of Darius's capture, unleashed an almost superhuman final burst of speed. He pushed his Macedonian cavalry to their absolute limits, covering an astonishing 50 miles, 80 kilometers, in a single day and night without rest. His desperate race was fueled by 2 desires: to capture Darius alive and to prevent Bessus from either killing him or claiming the glory of delivering the king to Alexander. He found them near Hecatompolis in Parthia. As Alexander's vanguard, led by Polydamas, finally approached the conspirators' fleeing column, Bessus and his co-conspirators, realizing their position was utterly hopeless and unwilling to let Darius fall alive into Alexander's hands, made a final, brutal decision. They mortally wounded Darius, stabbing him multiple times, and then abandoned him in the cart, leaving him to die alone by the roadside as they desperately fled further east into the vastness of Bactria. According to the most poignant accounts, Alexander's advanced guard, led by Polydamas, found Darius dying, utterly alone and bleeding profusely in the forsaken ox cart. A Macedonian soldier, Polystratus, reportedly dismounted and offered him water. As Darius took the water, he reportedly expressed profound gratitude to Alexander for his kind treatment of his captive family, and, in a moment of almost tragic grandeur, wished Alexander well and effectively recognized him as his legitimate successor, before finally succumbing to his wounds. When Alexander himself arrived shortly thereafter, and stood before the lifeless body of his great adversary, the man whose empire he had dismantled, his reaction was complex and profound. He allegedly showed genuine grief, shedding tears and covering the dead king with his own royal cloak. This act, whether a moment of true sorrow for a fallen monarch or a shrewd piece of political theater designed to display his chivalry and righteous anger at Bessus's betrayal, powerfully cemented Alexander's claim. He was not merely a conqueror, but the legitimate avenger and successor to the Achaemenid dynasty, taking the mantle of the King of Kings not through regicide, but by inheriting a vacant throne. He ordered Darius's body to be taken back to Persepolis and buried with full royal honors in the Achaemenid royal tombs, alongside his ancestors, a final, powerful symbol of the transition of power. Darius's death in July 330 BCE marked the definitive and official end of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, which had spanned over 2 centuries and stretched across 3 continents. The last living symbol of the dynasty was gone. For Alexander, it was the culmination of his vengeance for Greece, the formal justification for his now uncontested rule over Asia. He was, in fact and increasingly in title, the King of Asia. However, Darius's death also presented a new, immediate, and complex challenge. Bessus, the regicide, had fled into his powerful satrapy of Bactria and openly proclaimed himself the new Persian king, Artaxerxes IV. This audacious act transformed Bessus from a mere satrap into Alexander's primary enemy, a usurper and traitor who needed to be hunted down and brought to justice to fully legitimize Alexander's new claim to the Persian throne. This pivotal moment ushered in the grueling and often brutal period of campaigns in the eastern satrapies. Alexander now found himself fighting a fundamentally different kind of war. The vast, remote provinces of Parthia, Hyrcania, Bactria, Sogdiana, modern-day Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Arachosia were wild, mountainous, and often desert regions, populated by fiercely independent, nomadic, and semi-nomadic tribes. These peoples were not accustomed to the large-scale, pitched battles of the West. Instead, they excelled in swift, devastating guerrilla tactics, ambushes in narrow mountain passes, lightning-fast hit-and-run raids, scorched-earth policies that left no supplies for the invaders, and the maddening ability to melt away into the vast, inhospitable landscape. They fought with a desperate ferocity to protect their ancestral lands and their cherished way of life, often seeing Alexander not as a liberator from Persia, but as yet another foreign invader. Alexander had to radically adapt his strategies and the very composition of his army. He broke his traditional Macedonian army into smaller, more flexible, and highly mobile units, capable of rapid movement across incredibly difficult terrain. He increased the use of his light cavalry, like the Scythian horse archers he later recruited, and specialized mountain troops. He endured, and forced his men to endure, grueling forced marches through endless deserts under a brutal sun, and over treacherous, snow-capped mountain passes, confronting extreme climates that tested their limits. His troops, accustomed to decisive pitched battles and grand victories, found these protracted campaigns endlessly frustrating and utterly exhausting. They faced unseen enemies, ambushes around every bend, and the grim reality of a war of attrition where victory was measured in slow, painful gains, not glorious charges. During these challenging years, Alexander founded numerous new Alexandria cities, e.g., Alexandria in Arachosia, Alexandria Eschate, the farthest in modern Tajikistan, strategically placed as military outposts, trade hubs, and centers of Hellenic influence to control these restless, newly acquired regions. These eastern campaigns, often overshadowed by the grand battles, were arguably the most physically demanding and psychologically taxing of Alexander's entire military career. They stretched his army, his logistics, and his personal endurance to their absolute limits, costing him significant casualties not just from battle, but from attrition, disease, and the sheer unforgiving nature of the environment. It was also during this tumultuous period that Alexander began to consciously and controversially integrate Persian elements into his administration, his court, and even his own personal appearance. He started wearing some Persian dress, like the diadem and eventually the sidaris, a Persian royal headwear, adopted certain elaborate court rituals, such as proskynesis, the act of prostrating oneself before the king, a common Persian practice but anathema to most Greeks, and appointed Persian nobles to administrative roles as satraps and commanders, hoping to foster loyalty and facilitate governance over his new, vast, multi-ethnic empire. His reasoning was pragmatic. He couldn't rule an empire solely with Macedonians. He needed to integrate. However, this pragmatic approach to empire building, so effective in theory, soon led to growing resentment, suspicion, and friction within his own Macedonian ranks. His veteran companions, who had fought and bled for him for years, began to fear that their king was going native, adopting autocratic Persian ways, and forgetting his Macedonian roots. They felt increasingly marginalized, watching as Persians gained favor, and their king demanded forms of respect that felt alien and tyrannical. This cultural dilution, coupled with the endless, brutal war against elusive enemies far from home, for reasons that were increasingly personal to Alexander rather than pan-Hellenic, began to erode the fierce loyalty and camaraderie that had defined his army. This period, therefore, marks not just the geographical expansion of his empire, but the tragic inception of deeper internal strife and paranoia that would increasingly plague Alexander's final years. The hunt for Bessus continued, leading Alexander ever deeper into the mysterious and challenging lands of the Far East, far beyond the comfortable confines of the Hellenic world, towards the very edge of the known earth. As Alexander plunged deeper into the vast and untamed eastern satrapies, relentlessly pursuing Bessus and tirelessly subjugating fiercely independent tribes, a profound shift began to occur within his own ranks. The initial fervor and shared purpose that had propelled his army across continents began to fray under the relentless strain of endless campaigning. For years, the Macedonians had fought with unmatched loyalty, driven by the promise of vengeance for Greece and the boundless charisma of their young king. But now, far from home, facing unseen enemies in an unforgiving landscape, and with the great King Darius finally dead, the war felt increasingly aimless, its purpose ever more personal to Alexander, rather than a shared Hellenic crusade. The primary catalyst for this growing discontent was Alexander's increasingly overt Orientalization. In a pragmatic effort to consolidate his vast new empire and appeal to his Persian subjects, Alexander began to adopt Persian customs. He started to wear elements of Persian royal dress, such as the white tunic, the purple sash, and even, controversially, the sidaris, the upright Persian royal headdress. He initiated the practice of incorporating Persian nobles into his court, appointing them to high administrative and even military positions. Most contentious of all was his attempt to introduce proskynesis, the Persian custom of prostrating oneself before the king, a practice that Macedonians and Greeks viewed as reserved for deities and therefore an affront to their tradition of free speech and equality before their sovereign. This adoption of foreign customs and the elevation of former enemies deeply alienated Alexander's veteran Macedonian companions and even the common soldiers. They had fought and bled to conquer Persia, not to become Persian. They saw their king, whom they had once admired for his Macedonian directness, slowly adopting the very autocratic, almost tyrannical, behaviors they had fought against. Their traditional freedom of speech, parrhesia, the right to openly advise and even criticize their king, was increasingly met with coldness, suspicion, or outright wrath. Alexander, once approachable, now seemed to demand absolute, unquestioning deference, fostering an environment where dissent was dangerous and trust rapidly eroded. This shift marked the beginning of a darkening shadow over his reign, transforming the camaraderie of conquest into a chilling landscape of plots and paranoia. The atmosphere of suspicion and fear soon erupted into a series of brutal purges that decimated Alexander's old guard, staining his legacy with the blood of his most loyal companions. The first major crisis revolved around Philotas, the son of Parmenion, and commander of the elite Companion cavalry, the very core of Alexander's striking power. Philotas, a powerful and influential figure, was accused of involvement in a plot to assassinate Alexander. The specifics of the plot were murky, perhaps even fabricated, but the accusation centered on his alleged failure to report an overheard conspiracy against the king. At a carefully orchestrated assembly of the Macedonian army, Philotas was put on trial. Under duress and likely torture, he was forced to confess, though the veracity of this confession remains highly debated by historians. He was swiftly condemned and executed, publicly speared by the soldiers. This act, targeting one of the highest-ranking and most well-connected Macedonians, sent a shockwave of fear through the entire army. It demonstrated Alexander's willingness to eliminate anyone, no matter how powerful, if he suspected disloyalty. But the execution of Philotas was merely the prelude to an even more chilling act, the murder of Parmenion. Parmenion was not just any general. He was the most experienced and respected of Philip's old guard, Alexander's second-in-command for years. The general who had secured the first victories in Asia Minor and commanded the vital left flank in every major battle. At the time of Philotas's trial, Parmenion was far away in Ecbatana, guarding the immense Persian treasury. Alexander, fearing that Parmenion would seek vengeance for his son's death, or perhaps simply seeing him as too powerful and independent to tolerate, made a calculated and utterly ruthless decision. He dispatched secret messengers, riding on relays of fresh horses for a grueling 11-day journey, with sealed orders to Parmenion's subordinate officers. These orders commanded them to assassinate Parmenion immediately upon receiving the dispatch, before the news of Philotas's execution could reach him. The old general, Alexander's most loyal and capable lieutenant, was brutally murdered, stabbed to death in his quarters. The cold, premeditated nature of this execution, targeting a figure so universally respected and loyal, utterly terrified the Macedonian army. It shattered any remaining illusions of inviolable trust and cemented the understanding that no one, regardless of past service, was safe from Alexander's suspicion. The atmosphere only grew heavier. A few years later, in 328 BCE, Alexander's volatile temper, exacerbated by drink and the relentless stress of campaigning, led to the infamous Cletus the Black incident. Cletus was a lifelong friend, a foster brother, and the man who had famously saved Alexander's life at the Battle of the Granicus River. During a drunken banquet in Maracanda, Samarkand, in Sogdiana, a heated argument erupted. Cletus, outspoken and perhaps emboldened by wine, began to openly criticize Alexander's adoption of Persian customs, his increasing autocracy, and perhaps most gallingly, his perceived downplaying of Philip's achievements in favor of his own. He even dared to remind Alexander that it was his father, Philip, who had truly forged the army, and that it was Cletus himself who had saved Alexander's life. Alexander, consumed by rage and perhaps the suppressed anxieties of his own divine claims, seized a spear and, against the desperate pleas of his companions, ran Cletus through, killing him instantly. The immediate aftermath was one of profound shock and remorse for Alexander, who reportedly fell into a deep depression, regretting his terrible act. Yet, the irreparable damage was done. The murder of Cletus symbolized the tragic triumph of paranoia and unchecked power over loyalty and friendship. The chilling trend culminated in the Page Conspiracy of 327 BCE, which directly implicated the philosopher Callisthenes, Aristotle's nephew and Alexander's official historian. The conspiracy began with Hermolaus, a royal page who, after being publicly humiliated by Alexander for a trivial hunting infraction, plotted with other pages to assassinate the king. The plot was discovered, and the pages confessed under torture, implicating Callisthenes. Callisthenes had made himself unpopular with Alexander for his outspoken refusal to perform proskynesis and his philosophical arguments against the practice, maintaining that it was an insult to Greek ideals of freedom and equality. Whether Callisthenes was truly involved in the assassination plot or simply a victim of political convenience, Alexander, now having a justification to remove a vocal critic, remains debated. Nevertheless, Callisthenes was imprisoned and soon died, either from torture or illness, while the pages were brutally executed. This final incident confirmed Alexander's transformation. He had become a ruler who would not tolerate any form of dissent, however intellectual or well-intentioned. The fear was now absolute, and Alexander himself became increasingly isolated within his own court. surrounded by men who either feared him or sought to flatter him. Alexander's psychological state during this period appears to have shifted profoundly. His belief in his own divinity, fostered by the oracle at Siwa and his unparalleled successes, seemed to morph into an increasing sense of megalomania and isolation. This was coupled with a deepening paranoia, a fear of betrayal that led him to swift, often brutal purges of those he came to distrust. His volatile temper became more pronounced, erupting in fits of uncontrolled rage. The impact on his veteran army was profound. Fear began to replace the shared enthusiasm of earlier campaigns. Resentment simmered beneath the surface, yet obedience remained absolute, driven by the sheer force of Alexander's personality, the continued string of his military successes, which suggested divine favor, and the terrifying knowledge of what happened to those who questioned or defied him. The pursuit of Bessus concluded with the capture and execution of the usurper, gruesomely tortured and paraded before being dismembered, a final, public act of retribution that served as a grim warning. With the Achaemenid Empire officially dissolved, its symbolic heart burned, its last claimant dead, and its most defiant successor brutally punished, Alexander had indeed conquered. But the price of absolute power, and the psychological toll of relentless conquest, was evident in the darkening shadow that now fell upon his reign, setting the stage for his next, most ambitious, and ultimately tragic venture, the push into India, with an army increasingly fractured and a king increasingly isolated. For Alexander, the conquest of Persia was not an end, but merely a stepping stone. His relentless ambition, fueled by an insatiable curiosity and a profound belief in his own divine destiny, now compelled him to push further eastward than any Western army had ever dared. He sought not merely new territories, but the legendary ocean that was believed to encircle the earth, the ultimate geographical boundary. He yearned to surpass even the mythical exploits of Dionysus and Heracles, who were fabled to have campaigned in India before him. Moreover, though Darius was dead, some Persian satraps, like the one in Gandhara, still clung to their power in the Far East, offering a pragmatic military justification for his continued advance. The journey to India began with Alexander leading his forces through the formidable Hindu Kush mountains in 327 BCE. This was Alexander's most geographically challenging campaign yet. The passes were treacherous, often snowbound even in spring, and the terrain relentlessly unforgiving. To efficiently subdue the vast and ethnically diverse regions, Alexander often divided his army, leading one column personally while sending another under his generals, a testament to his confidence in his commanders and his commitment to overwhelming local resistance. His army faced a new, brutal form of warfare against fierce, independent mountain tribes like the Aspasians, Gurians, and Assakenoi. These tribes were not accustomed to centralized authority, and they fought with desperate courage from their impregnable strongholds. Alexander was forced to engage in a series of difficult, often bloody sieges against fortified hilltops and natural fortresses. One of the most famous was the Siege of Aornus, a massive, seemingly unassailable rock fortress perched high in the mountains, a place said to be impenetrable even for Heracles. Alexander, personally leading climbing parties and directing engineering efforts, conquered it, a testament to his unwavering resolve and innovative siegecraft. He sustained numerous injuries during these relentless skirmishes and sieges, showcasing his personal bravery but also the increasing toll the campaign was taking. As Alexander descended into the fertile plains of the Punjab in 326 BCE, he encountered a complex political landscape of numerous independent Indian kingdoms, each ruled by powerful local rajas. His initial diplomatic overtures were met with mixed results. Ambi-Omphis, the ruler of Taxila, a major kingdom, immediately submitted to Alexander, offering valuable military assistance and provisions. He saw Alexander as a powerful ally against his perennial rival, Porus, the formidable king of the Pauravas, whose kingdom lay across the Hydaspes River. It was against Porus that Alexander would fight one of his most legendary battles, the Battle of the Hydaspes River, modern Jhelum. Porus was no minor chieftain. He commanded a formidable army of approximately 30,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, 300 scythed chariots, and, most terrifyingly, around 200 majestic war elephants. These elephants were a psychological and tactical nightmare for Alexander's Macedonians, who had little experience fighting against them. Their sheer size, their ability to trample infantry, and the terror they instilled in horses made them a seemingly invincible force. Adding to the challenge, the Hydaspes River was swollen by the monsoon rains, making a direct crossing perilous under the watchful eyes of Porus's army, which was arrayed on the opposite bank. Alexander, facing this seemingly impregnable defense, resorted to one of his most brilliant and elaborate deceptions. For days, he publicly paraded his army along the riverbanks, conducting feigned crossing attempts at various points, using mock attacks and loud demonstrations to lull Porus into complacency. Meanwhile, under the cover of darkness and a fierce thunderstorm, Alexander secretly moved a significant portion of his army, including his elite companion cavalry and half the phalanx, about 17 miles 27 kilometers upstream to a wooded island, where a less guarded crossing was possible. He left Craterus with a portion of the army opposite Porus's main camp, with strict orders not to cross until Alexander had already engaged the enemy or Porus began to retreat. The Battle of the Hydaspes unfolded with Alexander's signature audacity. Under the cloak of the storm, he launched his surprise crossing. As his vanguard landed, Porus, realizing the deception, immediately dispatched his son and a small cavalry force to intercept them, but they were quickly overwhelmed. Porus then reluctantly moved his main army to confront Alexander, bringing his formidable elephant corps to the front. The battle itself was a spectacle of chaos and ingenuity. Alexander's cavalry, once across, skillfully outmaneuvered Porus's cavalry, preventing them from encircling the Macedonian infantry. The main clash came when Alexander's phalangites, arrayed in their disciplined formation, faced the terrifying charge of the war elephants. Initially, the elephants wreaked havoc, trampling Macedonian soldiers and causing fear and disruption. Their sheer power broke formations and scattered men. However, the Macedonians, disciplined and quick-thinking, adapted. They targeted the elephants' legs with their long sarissas, or used javelins to wound their riders. As the elephants became wounded and panicked, they often turned indiscriminately, trampling both sides, becoming as much a danger to Porus's own infantry as to Alexander's. The Macedonian light infantry and cavalry then exploited the gaps created by the rampaging elephants, cutting down the Indian infantry. Porus himself, mounted on his largest elephant, fought with immense personal bravery, a towering figure inspiring his men even as his lines began to crumble. Alexander's brilliant tactical maneuvering, combined with the unparalleled discipline of his combined arms, cavalry, phalanx, light infantry working in unison, ultimately led to a decisive victory. Porus's army was shattered, his elephants largely neutralized or turned against him. Despite the ferocity of the battle, Alexander, ever the astute statesman, sought out Porus. Upon his capture, a famous exchange occurred. Alexander asked Porus, "How do you wish to be treated?" Porus, with defiant dignity, replied, "Like a king." Impressed by Porus's courage and kingly bearing, Alexander not only returned his kingdom but greatly expanded it, turning him into a loyal and powerful satrap, a wise decision that helped stabilize the region. However, the victory at Hydaspes, though glorious, came at a heavy cost in casualties and, more significantly, in the morale of Alexander's army. They had faced an enemy unlike any before, fought terrifying beasts, and endured the grueling campaigns in treacherous mountains. They were exhausted, battered, and yearned for home. The prospect of facing even more powerful Indian kingdoms, rumored to possess even larger armies and greater numbers of elephants further east, filled them with dread. At the Hyphasis, Bees River, the easternmost major river of the Punjab, the simmering discontent finally boiled over. Alexander, driven by his boundless ambition, proposed crossing this river and continuing his march to the mythical ocean at the very edge of the world. But his army, which had followed him across thousands of miles and endured unimaginable hardships, finally refused. Led by Coenus, one of his most loyal generals, and supported by the silent, resolute protest of the entire army, the Macedonians declared they would go no further. Their reasons were manifold: sheer exhaustion, the fear of endless war, the terror of more elephants and monstrous creatures whispered about in local legends, and a profound longing for the familiar world they had left behind. They had accumulated grievances too: the purges of their beloved commanders, Alexander's orientalization, and the feeling that their king's quest was now entirely personal, disconnected from their shared purpose. Alexander, initially furious, pleaded, cajoled, and threatened. He delivered impassioned speeches, appealing to their glory, their destiny, and his own divine favor. But for 3 days, he sulked in his tent, awaiting a change of heart that never came. This was an unprecedented moment. The unconquerable Alexander, confronted by the unbreakable will of his own men, was forced to capitulate. It was a profound psychological defeat for him, a moment where his personal will met its limit, imposed not by an enemy army, but by the very soldiers who had made him supreme. At the Hyphasis, Alexander ordered the construction of 12 colossal altars, each symbolizing one of the Olympian gods, a testament to the farthest point of his astonishing eastward conquest. With his dream of reaching the ocean thwarted, he prepared for the long, arduous journey home, choosing a different, equally challenging route through the uncharted southern reaches of the Persian Empire. The dream of world conquest had been clipped, not by a foe's spear, but by the sheer human endurance of his own loyal, but finally broken, army. The edge of the world, for Alexander, was not a geographical limit, but a human one. The scene at the Hyphasis River was unprecedented. For the first time in his career, Alexander, the unyielding conqueror, had been forced to turn back, not by the might of an enemy, but by the sheer, unwavering will of his own exhausted army. The psychological impact of this capitulation must have been profound for a man who believed himself divinely destined to conquer the entire world. Yet, ever the pragmatist, Alexander swiftly shifted focus from continued conquest to the strategic return. He devised a plan for the journey home that was as ambitious and audacious as his conquests, a dual-pronged expedition, one by land, one by sea, to further explore and consolidate his vast new empire. He ordered the construction of a massive fleet of nearly 2,000 vessels, ranging from large troop transports to smaller exploratory craft, to sail down the mighty Indus River and then westward along the uncharted coast of the Indian Ocean. This naval arm, commanded by his trusted admiral Granicus, was tasked with mapping the coast, discovering new trade routes, and establishing supply points for the main army. Alexander himself, however, chose the most perilous route for his main army, an overland march through the treacherous Jedrosian Desert, modern Balochistan, a vast and arid region straddling parts of modern Iran and Pakistan. This choice has long been debated by historians. Was it a deliberate act of punishment for his army's refusal to advance further? Or was it driven by his insatiable thirst for exploration and conquest, seeking to subdue the coastal regions and unify his empire with the Indus River territory? It was perhaps a combination of both, a testament to his unyielding will and a desire to connect his newly conquered Indus territories with his existing domains, even if it meant risking everything. A third column, under Craterus, containing the bulk of the non-combatants, elephants, and heavier baggage, was sent along a more hospitable northern route through Arachosia, avoiding the worst of the desert. The initial phase of the return involved the perilous journey down the Indus River. As Alexander's massive flotilla descended the river, his forces were compelled to engage in a series of fierce naval and land engagements against the independent and hostile Indian tribes who inhabited the riverbanks, notably the Malians and the Oxydraci. These were proud, warrior peoples who fiercely resisted Alexander's passage. During the siege of Amalian's stronghold, Alexander, always leading from the front with reckless personal bravery, famously leaped alone onto the city walls after his ladder broke, finding himself surrounded by enemy soldiers. He was severely wounded, struck in the chest by an arrow that pierced his lung. He collapsed, near death, and had to be carried out by his desperately fighting bodyguard. The army, for a terrifying period, believed their king was dead. The panic that swept through the ranks was immense, followed by an outpouring of profound relief and joy when news of his survival spread. This near-fatal injury, however, underscored his unparalleled recklessness and the immense personal cost of his leadership. The true ordeal, however, began when Alexander's main army entered the Gedrosian desert in late 325 BCE. This vast, desolate expanse of sand dunes, jagged mountains, and barren salt flats was, and remains, one of the most inhospitable regions on Earth. It was an inferno of scorching heat, with temperatures soaring to unimaginable levels, and, most critically, an almost complete absence of water sources. This was no longer a war against men, but a desperate struggle against the raw, unforgiving elements. The suffering endured by the army was unimaginable and widespread. Men and animals collapsed from extreme heat stroke, their bodies quickly desiccated by the relentless sun and dry winds. The agonizing lack of water was the primary killer. Soldiers fought each other for the last drops, and thousands succumbed to thirst. Hunger was also pervasive, as supplies dwindled or were abandoned. The desert sand, fine and treacherous, buried supply columns and pack animals. Mules and camels, unable to keep up or find sustenance, died in droves, leading to the abandonment of precious baggage, equipment, and even the plunder from India. What began as an orderly march slowly devolved into a desperate scramble for survival. Despite the overwhelming hardships, desertion was remarkably rare, largely due to the army's deep-seated fear of Alexander's retribution, which was known to be swift and brutal. Alexander, true to his character, shared every hardship with his men. He famously refused water offered to him, pouring it out in front of his parched troops to show solidarity. He personally led efforts to find water, inspiring and pushing his men through sheer force of will. Yet, despite his personal leadership, the losses were catastrophic. While ancient sources vary wildly, some claiming upwards of 75% casualties, modern estimates suggest tens of thousands of lives were lost, not in battle, but to the brutal indifference of the desert. It was perhaps the greatest single disaster of his military career, a stark reminder that even the mightiest army could be broken by nature itself. In parallel, Nearchus's sea voyage down the Indus and along the Makran coast was an equally harrowing odyssey. His fleet battled unknown currents, fierce storms, and critical shortages of fresh water and provisions. Many of his ships were wrecked, and his crews faced the agonizing prospect of thirst and starvation on an uncharted sea. Their journey was a monumental feat of ancient navigation and endurance. After months of desperate sailing, in a truly miraculous reunion, Nearchus's emaciated fleet eventually rendezvoused with Alexander's equally battered army at a coastal town in Carmania. The joy and relief of the survivors on both sides were immense, celebrating their deliverance from the jaws of death. Upon emerging from the nightmare of the Gedrosian desert into the more hospitable province of Carmania, Alexander was greeted with a mixture of overwhelming relief and burgeoning outrage. During his prolonged absence in the east, many of his appointed satraps and military commanders in the western provinces, Persia, Media, Carmania itself, had succumbed to widespread corruption, tyranny, and outright disloyalty. They had plundered treasuries, oppressed their subjects, misused funds, and even executed loyal officials, believing Alexander would never return from the edge of the world. Alexander, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose and a profound anger at this betrayal, swiftly initiated a series of brutal and uncompromising purges. He acted with characteristic ruthlessness, executing numerous corrupt governors disloyal commanders, and even some of his own companions who had abused their power. Famous examples include the execution of the satrap of Persis and the flight of Harpalus, Alexander's trusted treasurer, who, having embezzled a colossal sum of money, fled with his mistress and a force of mercenaries to Athens, fearing Alexander's wrath. This swift and decisive action, though bloody, sent an unmistakable message throughout the empire. Alexander's central authority was absolute, and disloyalty or corruption would be met with swift and merciless justice. He reorganized the imperial administration, reinforcing central control and ensuring that his vast, sprawling empire, now stretching from Greece to India, was firmly under his direct command. The arduous return through the Gedrosian desert thus became a grim symbol of Alexander's unyielding ambition and the immense human cost of his empire. It tested his leadership against the most brutal natural forces and exposed the fragility of his vast domains when left to lesser men. Emerging from this crucible of suffering, Alexander was more resolved than ever to consolidate his power and exert absolute control, even as the seeds of future discontent and the weight of his own mortality began to take root. Returning to Babylon in 324 BCE was a symbolic act for Alexander. It was a return to the administrative and strategic heart of his burgeoning empire, a place from which he could effectively govern his vast dominions stretching from Greece to India. Here, amidst the ancient wonders of the city, Alexander began to fully articulate and implement his grand vision, not merely of conquest, but of imperial consolidation and Hellenization. He envisioned a unified Greco-Persian empire, a fusion of East and West, where a common culture, the Koine Greek language, and a shared administration would bind disparate peoples. He initiated ambitious engineering projects, including plans to restore the Etemenanke ziggurat and improve the Euphrates navigation, demonstrating his long-term commitment to his new capital. Even as he imposed order and stability, Alexander's boundless ambition remained undiminished. He began meticulously planning future campaigns, a naval expedition to circumnavigate Arabia, followed by potential conquests of North Africa, and even a renewed push westward into the Mediterranean. His restless spirit and strategic mind constantly sought new horizons, new challenges to overcome. However, these ambitious plans and Alexander's policies of cultural fusion increasingly grated against the deeply ingrained prejudices and traditions of his Macedonian veterans. The Susa weddings in 324 BCE epitomized this growing discord. In a magnificent and lavish ceremony, Alexander orchestrated the marriage of himself and over 80 of his senior officers to Persian noblewomen. He himself took 2 wives, Statira, a daughter of Darius III, and Parysatis, a daughter of Artaxerxes III, an earlier Persian king. His stated motivation was to promote racial harmony, create a new Greco-Persian ruling class, and further legitimize his rule in the eyes of his Persian subjects. Yet, for many Macedonians, this was an abhorrent spectacle, a forced integration that felt like a betrayal. They viewed their Persian wives as concubines, not equals, and resented the king's efforts to blur the lines between conqueror and conquered. It was perceived as a dilution of Macedonian purity and a threat to their privileged status. This resentment was further inflamed by Alexander's policy of integrating Persian soldiers into his army. He ordered the training of 30,000 Persian youths, known as the Epigoni, successors, in Macedonian military tactics, including the use of the sarissa. He also began incorporating Persian cavalry into the companion cavalry and other elite units. While militarily pragmatic for governing a vast empire, this deeply offended the Macedonian veterans. They had long prided themselves as the invincible core of the army, and now they saw their hard-won glory and elite status being shared, even diluted, by former enemies. The simmering discontent finally erupted into open mutiny at Opis in 324 BCE. Alexander, possibly testing his army's loyalty or genuinely planning a rotation of veterans, announced that he intended to send home those Macedonians who were too old or too infirm for continued service. This was the spark that ignited years of accumulated resentment. The army, tired of endless campaigning, alienated by his Persianizing policies, and grieving for fallen comrades while feeling overlooked, demanded that all of them be discharged and sent home. They openly mocked Alexander, sarcastically telling him to go conquer the world with his new father, Amun, and his Persian soldiers. Alexander's response was swift, decisive, and chillingly theatrical. He withdrew to his tent for 3 days, refusing all contact. He then reappeared, dramatically dismissing all Macedonian units from his army, and, in an unprecedented move, appointed Persian officers to command units that were traditionally Macedonian, even transferring Macedonians to Persian units. This bold gamble shocked the army into submission. Facing the prospect of being left stranded, stripped of their honor, and replaced by the very people they had conquered, the Macedonians broke. They humbled themselves, begged for forgiveness, and reconciled with their king in a tearful, highly emotional ceremony. Alexander sealed the reconciliation with a grand feast of reconciliation for 9,000 Macedonians and Persians, symbolically offering a toast to harmony and partnership. While seemingly successful, the Opus Mutiny laid bare the deep cracks within Alexander's multi-ethnic empire and the fragile nature of his absolute authority. Amidst these political and military tensions, Alexander suffered a devastating personal blow, the sudden death of Hephaestion. Hephaestion was more than Alexander's closest friend. He was his confidant, his most trusted general, and possibly his lover. Their bond was legendary, described as a profound, almost inseparable connection. Hephaestion died suddenly in Ecbatana in late 324 BCE, likely from a fever, perhaps typhoid, or complicated by heavy drinking. Alexander's grief was immediate, overwhelming, and utterly irrational. He reportedly wept inconsolably for days, refused food, ordered the execution of Hephaestion's physician, and even destroyed a temple as an outlet for his rage. He commanded an unprecedented and lavish funeral in Babylon, complete with immense pyres and extravagant monuments, and even decreed Hephaestion's deification, ordering that he be worshipped as a divine hero. The loss of Hephaestion plunged Alexander into an even deeper state of isolation and perhaps contributed to a further unraveling of his psychological stability. He had lost his only true confidant, a man who could speak truth to power without fear, and the void was immense. The final months of Alexander's life in Babylon were marked by increasingly strange behavior and a deepening superstition. He became obsessed with omens and prophecies, consulting Babylonian priests and seers about his future plans, particularly the Arabian campaign. He seemed to sense an impending doom. His health, already compromised by years of brutal campaigning, numerous wounds, and increasingly heavy drinking, began to fail. In late May 323 BCE, after a prolonged banquet and drinking bout, Alexander was struck by a sudden, violent illness. He developed a high fever, severe abdominal pain, and gradually lost the ability to move or speak. For 10 agonizing days, his condition worsened. His closest companions remained by his bedside, witnessing his rapid decline. The common soldiers, desperate and fearing the worst, demanded to see their king one last time. They were filed past his bed, one by one, where Alexander, too weak to speak, could only raise his hand in a silent, final farewell to the men who had followed him to the ends of the earth. On June 10 or 11, 323 BCE, in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II in Babylon, Alexander the Great died, just shy of his 33rd birthday. The cause of his death remains one of history's great mysteries and sources of endless speculation. While many modern historians lean towards a natural cause, malaria, typhoid fever, pancreatitis, or even a perforated ulcer, exacerbated by his weakened constitution and heavy drinking, the ancient world was rife with rumors of poison. Theories abound that he was poisoned by disgruntled generals. Antipater, his regent in Macedon, and his son Cassander were often implicated. by his own cupbearer, or by a faction of his officers fearful of his next boundless ambition. No definitive evidence for poison has ever been found, but the chaotic aftermath and the immediate struggle for power lent credence to such dark whispers. Alexander's alleged last words, when asked who should inherit his empire, were famously, "To the strongest or perhaps to the best." Whatever the precise phrasing, the ambiguity was intentional or a tragic oversight. His sudden death, without a clear successor, immediately shattered his vast, personal empire. The generals who had served him for years, the Diadochi or successors, plunged into a brutal, decades-long series of civil wars that would carve up Alexander's dream into separate Hellenistic kingdoms. The legacy of his conquests was immense, but the dream of a unified Greco-Persian world died with him in Babylon. The world would forever wonder what might have been, had the greatest conqueror lived to consolidate his colossal achievements. Alexander the Great's death in Babylon, on the cusp of further boundless ambitions, left a monumental vacuum. He was only 32 years old, and critically, he had named no clear successor. His last words, if they were truly to the strongest, proved to be a prophetic, if tragic, testament to the ensuing chaos. His wife, Roxanne, was pregnant with his only legitimate son, Alexander IV, who would be born months later. His mentally challenged half-brother, Philip III Aridius, held only nominal claim to the throne. With no mature, capable heir, the empire that Alexander had forged through blood, sweat, and unparalleled genius immediately began to fracture under the weight of its own immensity and the boundless ambitions of his leading generals. This pivotal period, lasting for decades after Alexander's death, is known to history as the Wars of the Diadochi, the successors. These were not mere border skirmishes. They were relentless, large-scale conflicts, marked by constantly shifting alliances, profound betrayals, and massive battles involving armies of a size unseen since Alexander's own campaigns. The immediate aftermath saw a desperate scramble for control. At the compromise of Babylon in 323 BCE, a hasty agreement was forged. Philip III Aridius and the unborn Alexander IV were nominally recognized as joint kings, but all real power lay with the powerful generals. Perdiccas was appointed as regent of the empire, while other prominent figures like Antipater, governor of Macedon and Greece, Craterus, a highly respected general, Antigonus I Monophthalmus, governor of Phrygia, Lysimachus, governor of Thrace, and two men who would found the most enduring dynasties, Ptolemy, governor of Egypt, and Seleucus, commander of the companion cavalry, later governor of Babylonia, carved out initial spheres of influence. This initial arrangement, however, proved to be a fragile peace, a temporary truce before the inevitable power struggle. The wars that followed, spanning roughly from 323 BCE to 281 BCE and beyond, were a brutal, complex dance of strategy, treachery, and sheer force. Each diadoch tirelessly sought to expand his territory and eventually claim the mantle of Alexander's sole legitimate successor. As these conflicts raged, the young Alexander IV and Philip III Aridius, tragic figures caught in this maelstrom, were eventually murdered, signifying the complete breakdown of Alexander's bloodline as a unifying force. With the royal house extinct, the generals abandoned any pretense of regency and began to declare themselves independent kings, solidifying their rule over their respective territories. Major battles, such as the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BCE, served as defining moments. Ipsus, in particular, saw Antigonus I defeated and killed by the combined armies of Lysimachus and Seleucus, an event that effectively cemented the division of Alexander's vast Asian territories. By the end of this tumultuous period, roughly by 281 BCE, Alexander's unified empire had irrevocably shattered into several powerful, independent entities that would define the subsequent Hellenistic age. The Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, founded by Ptolemy Isota and centered in the vibrant city of Alexandria, proved to be the most stable and longest-lasting of these realms. Protected by natural barriers, it flourished as a bastion of Greek culture, immense wealth, and unparalleled intellectual pursuit, enduring for nearly 3 centuries until the death of Cleopatra VII and its absorption by the rising power of Rome. Across Asia, the Seleucid Empire, established by Seleucus I Nicator, emerged as the largest of the Hellenistic kingdoms geographically, stretching from Asia Minor across Mesopotamia, Persia, and into parts of India. Despite its immense size, it was often difficult to control due to its sheer vastness and incredibly diverse populations, leading to a gradual loss of its eastern territories over time. In Alexander's homeland, the Antigonid kingdom of Macedon, after initial struggles, eventually fell under the control of Antigonus I's descendants, notably his son Demetrius Poliorcetes, and later the dynasty established by Antigonus Gonatas. This kingdom steadfastly maintained Macedonian traditions and constantly vied for influence and control over the fractious Greek city-states. Beyond these 3 major powers, other smaller, but significant, entities also emerged, such as the short-lived kingdom of Thrace under Lysimachus, which was eventually absorbed by its larger neighbors, the wealthy kingdom of Pergamum in Asia Minor, and various independent Greek city-states and leagues that struggled to maintain their autonomy amidst the ceaseless conflicts of the larger Hellenistic powers. Despite the fragmentation of his empire, Alexander's legacy was profound and enduring, irrevocably shaping the course of history for centuries. His conquests unleashed a powerful tide of Hellenization across the known world. The Greek language, specifically Koine Greek, became the lingua franca of trade, administration, and scholarship across his former empire, serving as a unifying linguistic bridge for diverse peoples. Greek art, architecture, philosophy, and political ideas spread far and wide, blending with indigenous cultures to create new, vibrant Hellenistic civilizations that bore the stamp of both East and West. The scores of Alexandrias he founded across his vast domains served not only as strategic military outposts but, more importantly, evolved into vital centers of Greek culture, learning, and bustling commerce. The economic impact of his conquests was equally transformative. The vast wealth of the Persian Empire, once largely locked away in royal treasuries, was released into the wider Mediterranean economy, stimulating trade on an unprecedented scale. The effective, albeit brief, unification of such immense territories under a single authority facilitated the creation of new, expansive trade routes and opened up new markets, while the standardization of coinage simplified transactions across continents. Militarily and politically, Alexander's campaigns redefined the very scale and scope of warfare. His brilliant use of combined arms, cavalry, phalanx, light infantry, and siege engines working in sophisticated unison, set new standards for military strategy that would be studied for generations. His daring creation of a truly multi-ethnic, multi-continental empire, even if short-lived, introduced the powerful concept of a world empire that would inspire future conquerors. Finally, Alexander's personal myth and image proved to be an inexhaustible source of inspiration. His life became a powerful, almost mythical template for later rulers and military commanders across history. Figures like Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and Napoleon Bonaparte famously studied his campaigns and explicitly sought to emulate his achievements. The Alexander Romance, a collection of fantastical tales about his life, further cemented his image as an almost superhuman figure, captivating the popular imagination for centuries. In the end, Alexander's legacy presents a profound paradox. His achievements were monumental, effectively linking East and West, opening new intellectual and commercial horizons, and laying the groundwork for a truly globalized classical world. Yet, his personal flaws, his growing paranoia, his uncontrollable temper, his insatiable ambition, and crucially, his failure to secure a clear succession, also created the very instability that shattered his dream. His grand vision of a perfectly fused Greco-Persian empire was an imperfectly realized experiment, but the powerful cultural blending he initiated fundamentally shaped the Hellenistic era, creating a dynamic new world that transcended the original boundaries of his initial conquests. He left behind not a unified empire, but a series of vibrant kingdoms that would carry forward the torch of Hellenistic culture, forever changing the face of Europe, Asia, and Africa. His life, a blazing comet across the ancient sky, remains a testament to what a single individual, driven by genius, charisma, and boundless ambition, can achieve, and the profound, often chaotic, consequences of such extraordinary power. While the sheer scale and audacity of Alexander's conquests often capture the imagination, reducing his legacy to mere territorial acquisition would be a profound disservice. His meteoric rise was, at its core, a testament to his unparalleled genius as a military strategist and tactician, a visionary who didn't just inherit a powerful army, but fundamentally revolutionized warfare for centuries. This segment moves beyond simply narrating his battles to dissecting how Alexander consistently achieved victory against numerically superior foes, exploring the innovations he inherited, those he personally developed, and his extraordinary ability to adapt his methods to any challenge or terrain. Alexander's foundation was the formidable Macedonian military machine forged by his father, Philip II. Philip had transformed a largely agrarian populace into the finest professional standing army of its age. He introduced the revolutionary sarissa, a pike often 18 to 20 feet long, which, when wielded by the tightly packed phalanx, created an impenetrable wall of bristling points. This phalanx was disciplined, drilled, and capable of executing complex maneuvers. Philip also perfected the companion cavalry, heavy cavalry armed with lances, renowned for their devastating wedge formation charge, and developed highly specialized support units like archers, slingers, and crucially, an advanced corps of siege engineers. Alexander didn't just inherit this. He rigorously drilled it, refined its efficiency, and infused it with his own aggressive spirit. He took Philip's formidable tool and wielded it with unprecedented precision and daring. The hallmark of Alexander's tactical brilliance was his masterful use of combined arms tactics. Unlike many commanders of his era who relied predominantly on a single arm, e.g., cavalry charge or infantry push, Alexander flawlessly integrated every component of his army into a seamless, destructive whole. His battles were not a series of independent engagements, but a synchronized ballet of destruction. The disciplined phalanx would fix the enemy center, absorbing their attacks and creating pressure. Simultaneously, his light infantry, peltasts, archers, slingers, would harass the enemy flanks, disrupting their cohesion. Then, at the decisive moment, the elite companion cavalry, often led by Alexander himself, would deliver the killing blow, a precise, irresistible charge into a weakened or exposed enemy flank, or directly at the enemy command, famously known as the hammer and anvil tactic, where the phalanx was the anvil and the cavalry was the hammer. This intricate synergy, demanding extraordinary discipline and perfect timing from all units, was repeatedly demonstrated, most devastatingly at Issus and Gaugamela. Beyond the battlefield, Alexander's attention to logistics and sustained campaigning was a marvel of ancient warfare. He led his army thousands of miles from home, deep into hostile territory, for over a decade. This required meticulous planning for supplies, forage, and water, especially in arid regions like Mesopotamia and the Gedrosian Desert. He established supply depots, secured communication lines, and often personally oversaw critical logistical operations. His ability to move large forces swiftly across vast distances, often on forced marches that would break lesser armies, was a key factor in his consistent ability to surprise and overwhelm his enemies. Alexander's genius also lay in his profound understanding of psychological warfare and leadership. He possessed an almost supernatural charisma that bound his men to him with fierce loyalty. He led from the front, enduring the same hardships, suffering multiple wounds, and fighting in the thick of every major engagement. This personal bravery inspired his troops to superhuman efforts. Simultaneously, he was adept at instilling fear in his enemies, using acts of calculated ruthlessness, e.g., Tyre, Gaza, to break their will to resist, turning potential sieges into surrenders. His theatrical acts, like his visit to the Oracle of Siwa or the elaborate honors for Darius, were also forms of psychological warfare, designed to legitimize his rule and demoralize his foes. His innovation and adaptability were critical to overcoming unique challenges. He didn't rigidly adhere to a single battle plan. At the Granicus, he recognized the enemy's defensive strength and initiated a seemingly reckless frontal assault that masked a deeper tactical purpose. At Issus, he turned the narrow terrain to his advantage, negating Persian numbers. At the Hydaspes, he faced the psychological terror of war elephants for the first time. His counter-strategy was not just brilliant deception to cross the river, but also involved specific tactics for his phalangites to disrupt and turn the elephants against their own lines, proving that no new weapon could truly surprise him. Even when confronted with the guerrilla warfare of the eastern Satrapies, he adapted by breaking down his larger units into smaller, more mobile forces, undertaking exhausting mountain sieges, and personally leading patrols. The often unsung heroes of Alexander's campaigns were his engineers and siegecraft specialists. Their expertise was indispensable. They built the massive mole at Tyre that allowed him to conquer the island city, constructed pontoon bridges for rapid river crossings, and devised new siege engines that could breach seemingly impregnable fortresses. Alexander's strategic mind fully integrated these technical capabilities into his overall military planning, transforming challenges into opportunities. Finally, while Alexander was the undisputed supreme commander, he had cultivated a highly capable and experienced corps of generals. Men like Parmenion, Craterus, Hephaestion, Nearchus, and Antigonus understood his vision, could execute complex maneuvers independently, and provided him with valuable counsel, though he increasingly tolerated less dissent in his later years. This command structure, built on years of shared experience and trust, allowed Alexander to implement intricate, multifaceted strategies that required disciplined execution across vast battlefields. In summary, Alexander's military genius was a complex interplay of inherited strength, strategic brilliance, tactical innovation, logistical mastery, and unparalleled leadership. He didn't just win battles. He changed the way wars were fought, leaving behind a tactical blueprint that would influence military thinkers for millennia. His campaigns remain a foundational study in military academies worldwide, a testament to the man who truly earned the title the Great on the battlefield. Behind the helmet and the mantle of the world's greatest conqueror was a man profoundly shaped by his earliest bonds and lifelong relationships. Alexander's personal world was a crucible of ambition, rivalry, deep affection, and ultimately, profound loss, all of which undeniably molded the king he became and the empire he forged. At the very core of his formative years were his legendary and notoriously tumultuous parents, Philip II of Macedon and Olympias of Epirus. Alexander's relationship with Philip was a complex blend of admiration and intense rivalry. Philip was the architect of the Macedonian military machine Alexander would inherit, a brilliant strategist and a shrewd diplomat. Alexander undoubtedly learned invaluable lessons from his father, yet he also bristled under his shadow. Philip's constant military successes, his multiple marriages, and his undeniable political acumen were both an inspiration and a challenge. Alexander yearned to surpass his father, a drive that propelled him relentlessly. The rivalry was intensified by Philip's volatile temperament and his tendency towards public displays of affection for his other sons, particularly Aristeus. This competitive dynamic, perhaps even a need for Philip's approval, arguably fueled Alexander's relentless pursuit of glory. His bond with his mother, Olympias, was equally, if not more, intense and perhaps, ultimately, destructive. Olympias was a fierce, proud, and intensely protective woman, a devotee of Dionysian cults, known for her passionate and often vindictive nature. She instilled in Alexander a profound belief in his own divine destiny, even fabricating tales of his conception by Zeus, not Philip. This unwavering devotion and mystical influence undoubtedly bolstered Alexander's confidence and sense of purpose. However, her overbearing and possessive nature, coupled with her deep-seated hatred for Philip and his other wives, embroiled Alexander in constant familial strife. Her ambition for him, and her relentless machinations against anyone she perceived as a rival, cast a long shadow over Alexander's early life and potentially sowed seeds of distrust towards others, even as he was fiercely loyal to her. Among all his relationships, none was as profound or as consistently enduring as his bond with Hephaestion. More than just a childhood friend, a loyal general, or a close confidant, Hephaestion was Alexander's intellectual equal, his trusted advisor, and, as many ancient sources suggest, his lifelong beloved companion. Their relationship, understood within the context of ancient Greek aristocratic pederasty, was one of deep love, mutual respect, and absolute trust. Hephaestion was Alexander's shadow, his sounding board, often the only one who could offer unvarnished advice without fear of reprisal. His calm demeanor often balanced Alexander's impulsiveness. When Hephaestion died suddenly in Ecbatana in 324 BCE, likely from a fever, Alexander's grief was immediate, overwhelming, and utterly irrational. He refused food for days, ordered an unprecedented period of mourning, executed Hephaestion's physician, and commanded the building of lavish funeral pyres and monuments. He even sought to deify Hephaestion. This extreme reaction, bordering on madness, underscored the depth of his loss and the immense void left by the only man who truly seemed to understand and ground him. Hephaestion's death irrevocably deepened Alexander's isolation and possibly contributed to his increasingly erratic behavior in his final year. Beyond Hephaestion, Alexander had a complex network of other companions and mentors. His former tutor, Aristotle, undoubtedly shaped his intellectual curiosity and his appreciation for Greek culture, but their paths diverged as Alexander's imperial ambitions soared, particularly over the question of how to treat conquered peoples. His relationships with senior generals like Parmenion, his father's old general, and Craterus, were initially built on respect and shared military goals. However, as Alexander's personal power grew and his temperament became more volatile, these relationships strained. The tragic murders of Parmenion and his son Philotas, driven by Alexander's paranoia, illustrate the ultimate fragility of even the oldest bonds when confronted by unchecked authority. The drunken murder of Cletus the Black, a man who had saved his life and a foster brother, epitomized Alexander's dangerous temper and his growing intolerance for any form of dissent, regardless of the speaker's loyalty or past service. Central to Alexander's inner world was his persistent search for identity and legitimation. From his youth, he cultivated the belief in his own divine parentage, claiming descent from Heracles through his father's line and Achilles through his mother's. Later, his visit to the oracle of Amun at Siwa, where he was reportedly hailed as the son of Zeus Amun, cemented his belief in his own godhood. This conviction wasn't just a political tool. It was a deep-seated part of his psychological makeup, driving him to surpass all mortals. This divine destiny influenced his decisions, pushed him to reckless personal bravery, and perhaps fueled his increasingly autocratic demands for proskynesis. He grappled with his Macedonian identity, his Greek cultural ideals, and his role as the new king of kings of the Persian Empire. His attempts at Greco-Persian fusion were, in part, an effort to create a new, hybrid imperial identity for himself and his subjects, yet this deeply alienated his Macedonian core. Finally, the role of alcohol and temperament cannot be ignored in understanding Alexander's personal world, especially in his later years. While heavy drinking was common in Macedonian court culture, Alexander's consumption appeared to increase, perhaps as a coping mechanism for the immense stress, loneliness, and psychological toll of his unprecedented conquests and personal losses. This heavy drinking undeniably exacerbated his already volatile temperament, leading to impulsive, violent outbursts like the murder of Cletus. His actions in the last few years of his life suggest a man under immense strain, increasingly isolated, and grappling with his own mortality even as he projected an image of invincible power. Alexander's personal world was thus a complex web of deep affections, fierce loyalties, profound losses, and internal contradictions. These relationships and personal struggles were not mere footnotes to his military campaigns. They were integral to understanding the drives, vulnerabilities, and ultimately, the tragic end of the man who conquered the known world. Alexander the Great's empire, though fleeting as a political entity, ironically served as the most powerful catalyst for a new globalized classical era. His primary legacy was not the unified realm he failed to secure, but rather the birth of the Hellenistic world, a distinct and dynamic period characterized by the unprecedented blending of Greek and Eastern cultures, ideas, and economies. His conquests broke down ancient barriers, opening vast swathes of territory to Greek influence and creating a fertile ground for a new civilization. One of the most visible and lasting imprints of Alexander's conquests was his ambitious program of urbanization. He founded, or refounded and renamed, numerous cities across his vast territories, many of them bearing his own name, the Alexandrias. These were not mere military outposts, though they often began that way. Strategically located along trade routes or at vital crossroads, these cities quickly blossomed into vibrant centers of Greek culture, administration, and commerce. They were deliberately designed with Greek civic institutions, gymnasia, theaters, agoras, and populated with Greek and Macedonian veterans, merchants, and artisans. These urban centers became powerful engines of Hellenization, drawing in local populations, fostering the adoption of Greek language and customs, and becoming melting pots where different cultures began to interact and merge. Alexandria in Egypt, by far the most famous, would grow to be the largest city in the ancient world, an unparalleled metropolis of learning and trade. The economic transformation unleashed by Alexander was equally profound. The vast accumulated wealth of the Persian Empire, once hoarded in royal treasuries at cities like Persepolis and Susa, was systematically released into the Mediterranean economy. This massive influx of bullion stimulated trade on an unprecedented scale, injecting liquidity into a system that had previously been more regional. Alexander's campaigns effectively unified vast economic zones, from the Aegean to the Indus, under a single, albeit temporary, authority. This facilitated the establishment of new, secure trade routes, both overland and maritime, thanks to Nice's explorations. The standardization of coinage across his empire, adopting the Attic standard, simplified transactions and fostered a more interconnected, pan-regional market system, leading to a boom in commerce and prosperity that benefited both Greeks and many local populations. Alexander's expeditions were not solely military. They were also voyages of discovery that led to significant advancements in geography, natural history, and exploration. He brought with him a retinue of scholars, surveyors, historians, like Callisthenes, botanists, and zoologists. These learned individuals systematically mapped vast new territories, recorded the flora and fauna, and observed the diverse customs of the peoples they encountered. Nice's perilous voyage along the uncharted coast of the Indian Ocean, in particular, was a monumental feat of ancient exploration, charting new waters and establishing maritime connections between India and the Persian Gulf. This explosion of new information vastly expanded the Greek world's geographical and scientific understanding, correcting existing maps and inspiring future generations of explorers and naturalists. Crucially, the Hellenistic age saw the spectacular rise of great libraries and centers of learning. Alexandria, above all, became the intellectual capital of the ancient world. Its legendary library and the associated Museion, a research institution, not merely a museum, attracted the greatest scholars, scientists, poets, and philosophers from across the Mediterranean and the Near East. Here, monumental efforts were made to collect, translate, and preserve all known works of literature and science, leading to breakthroughs in mathematics, Euclid, physics, Archimedes, astronomy, Aristarchus, medicine, Herophilus, and geography, Eratosthenes. Other cities, like Antioch and Pergamum, also developed significant libraries and schools, fostering an era of unprecedented intellectual activity and scholarly exchange. At the heart of this new world was cultural syncretism, the blending of Greek and Eastern cultures. While Alexander himself attempted to force some aspects of this fusion, like the Susa weddings, in the longer term, it became a more organic process. Greek art influenced local styles, leading to new forms like Greco-Buddhist art in Gandhara. Eastern deities found new worshippers in the Greek pantheon, and Greek philosophical ideas sometimes melded with Eastern spiritual traditions. This was not a one-way street of Hellenization, but a dynamic, reciprocal exchange that enriched both traditions. Underpinning this extensive cultural and economic integration was the widespread adoption of Koine Greek. This simplified, common dialect of Greek became the lingua franca across Alexander's former empire. It served as the universal language of administration, commerce, scholarship, and even popular culture, facilitating communication between diverse peoples across vast distances. Its influence was so profound that it remained the common language of the Eastern Mediterranean for centuries, eventually becoming the language in which the New Testament was written. In essence, Alexander's conquests, despite their military nature, ironically laid the groundwork for a period of immense cross-cultural pollination. He shattered old boundaries, unleashed vast resources, and ignited an era of intellectual curiosity and global interaction that would shape the contes of the ancient world for centuries to come, creating a truly interconnected and dynamically diverse Hellenistic civilization. Even before his untimely death, Alexander the Great was already a figure of legend. His unprecedented conquests, his personal charisma, his alleged divine parentage, and his often reckless bravery fueled an immediate process of mythologization. Soldiers returned from his campaigns with incredible tales. Writers began to embellish his deeds, and rumors of his miraculous feats and encounters with the supernatural spread like wildfire. This rapid transformation from historical figure to mythical hero laid the groundwork for one of the most enduring and widely disseminated bodies of literature in the ancient and medieval worlds, the Alexander Romance. The precise origins of the Alexander Romance are shrouded in mystery, but its earliest known version emerged in Alexandria, Egypt, likely in the 3rd century CE. Attributed, perhaps spuriously, to Alexander's official historian Callisthenes, hence sometimes called Pseudo-Callisthenes. This work was not a historical account but a sprawling, episodic narrative that blended genuine historical events with wild fantasy, magical realism, and epic adventure. In it, Alexander journeys to the ends of the earth, encounters mythical creatures like griffins and sirens, consults with talking trees, descends into the depths of the ocean, and battles monstrous races. It was a testament to the popular desire to see their greatest hero achieve not just human victories, but triumphs over the very fabric of nature and the supernatural. The Alexander Romance's most remarkable feature was its incredible adaptability and transnational appeal. It was translated, rewritten, and expanded upon in countless languages across a vast geographical and cultural spectrum, each iteration subtly molding Alexander to fit local values and narratives. In Persian and later Islamic tradition, Alexander was reimagined as Iskandar. Far from being simply a foreign conqueror, he became a complex and often heroic figure, integrated into the rich tapestry of Persian epic poetry, most famously in Ferdowsi's monumental Shahnameth, Book of Kings. Here, Iskandar is often depicted as a legitimate, even rightful, king of Persia, sometimes portrayed as a wise prophet or a divinely guided seeker of knowledge and justice, on a quest for the water of life or building the wall against Gog and Magog. This transformation speaks volumes about the enduring cultural impact and the need to reconcile the historical conqueror with a continuous national identity. Similarly, Alexander found a unique place in Jewish and Christian traditions. In Jewish texts, particularly Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, Alexander is presented in a remarkably positive light, respectful of Jerusalem and its religious customs, even diverting his army to spare the city. For Christians, while not a central figure, he sometimes appeared in allegorical narratives or historical chronicles, occasionally even lauded as a precursor to Christian rulers, his widespread conquests setting the stage for the spread of the gospel. Across medieval Europe, Alexander's legend flourished through Latin, French, English, and other vernacular translations of the Romance. He was often recast as a chivalrous knight, embodying the ideals of medieval heroism, courage, and worldly wisdom. He was frequently included among the Nine Worthies, a group of historical and legendary figures who personified chivalry, alongside figures like Hector, Caesar, and King Arthur. His adventures, particularly those involving his fantastical journeys and encounters, fueled the imaginations of court poets and troubadours, influencing countless epic poems, chronicles, and even early novels. The enduring power of Alexander's legend lies in its profound resonance with universal human themes. His story spoke to ambition, destiny, the quest for knowledge, the confrontation with the unknown, and the ultimate limits of human power. His youth, his mysterious death, and the sheer scale of his achievements made him an ideal protagonist for tales that pushed the boundaries of the ordinary. The fluidity of the Romance allowed each culture to project its own values, hopes, and anxieties onto his figure, making him a truly global hero. This pervasive presence in myth and memory creates a constant, fascinating tension with the historical Alexander. For historians, the challenge is to meticulously separate the factual accounts from the fantastical embellishments. Yet, it is precisely this divergence of history and legend that makes Alexander's legacy so rich. The Alexander of the Romance, with his flying machines and underwater adventures, is a testament not just to the man himself, but to the boundless human capacity for storytelling and the enduring fascination with figures who dare to push beyond the known horizon. His mythical journeys, in their own way, explored far greater distances than his armies ever did, reaching into the collective dreams of humanity. For centuries, Alexander the Great has stood as the quintessential conqueror, a figure of unmatched glory and strategic brilliance. Yet, a closer, more critical examination of his reign reveals a darker, more complex reality beneath the veneer of heroism. His relentless ambition, particularly in his later years, often manifested as megalomania and a disturbing embrace of autocracy, fundamentally altering the character of his rule and alienating those closest to him. The relatively open, if disciplined, Macedonian court tradition, where companions could voice opinions, gradually gave way to a system demanding unquestioning obedience and even divine reverence, epitomized by his insistence on proskynesis. This growing imperiousness was seen by many Macedonians as a profound betrayal of their traditional values and his father's more accessible style of kingship. Alexander's campaigns, while militarily successful, were frequently marred by acts of calculated cruelty and massacres that underscore the brutal realities of ancient warfare and his own ruthlessness. The most infamous example is the utter destruction of Thebes in 335 BCE. After the city revolted, Alexander ordered its complete razing, sparing only temples and the house of the poet Pindar. Its male inhabitants were slaughtered, and women and children sold into slavery, a horrific warning to other Greek cities contemplating rebellion. Similarly, after the extended and arduous siege of Tyre in 332 BCE, Alexander executed thousands of its male defenders by crucifixion and enslaved tens of thousands more, a brutal act of vengeance for their defiance. The siege of Gaza saw a similar, though perhaps less extensive, massacre and enslavement, along with the shocking, barbaric act of dragging the city's brave defender, Battus, alive behind Alexander's chariot, an echo of Achilles' treatment of Hector. These were not random acts of savagery, but calculated demonstrations of terror, designed to break future resistance through fear. Perhaps the most tragic and telling aspect of Alexander's later reign was his descent into paranoia and the purges of his inner circle. The trusted bonds of camaraderie forged over years of shared hardship were systematically severed by suspicion. The execution of Parmenion, his loyal and highly respected general, and Parmenian's son Philotas, commander of the Companion cavalry, remains one of the darkest stains on Alexander's record. Philotas was accused of conspiracy, likely falsely, tortured, and then executed. Parmenion, far away in Ecbatana, was then ruthlessly assassinated on Alexander's orders, not for any proven disloyalty, but out of fear that he might avenge his son. This act sent a chilling message throughout the army. No one, no matter how loyal or distinguished their service, was safe from Alexander's suspicion. The later, drunken murder of Cletus the Black, a close friend who had saved Alexander's life, further showcased his volatile temper and his growing intolerance for any criticism, no matter how well-intentioned or provoked. The Page conspiracy and the subsequent execution of Callisthenes, Aristotle's nephew, solidified the atmosphere of fear and intellectual repression. The enigmatic burning of Persepolis in 330 BCE is another point of controversy. While ancient sources offer conflicting accounts, some attributing it to a drunken impulse at the urging of a courtesan, others suggesting a deliberate act of vengeance for the Persian destruction of Athens, it remains a stark symbol of destructive power. The deliberate annihilation of the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire, a center of its culture and history, can be seen as an act of calculated subjugation rather than pure emotional outburst, marking a clear end to the old order, but at the cost of irreplaceable cultural heritage. The cost in human lives throughout Alexander's campaigns was immense. While Macedonians achieved unprecedented victories, these came at the price of constant attrition from battle, disease, starvation, and grueling forced marches, most devastatingly evident in the Gedrosian desert. For the conquered peoples, the cost was even higher, measured in massacres, enslavement, and the disruption of traditional ways of life. His ambition, while undeniably effective in forging an empire, was fueled by an often disregard for the immense human suffering it caused. Alexander's policies of forced cultural fusion, such as the mass Susa weddings and the integration of Persian soldiers into the Macedonian army, also drew heavy criticism from his own men. While historians debate his true motives, whether genuine desire for a new unified culture or pragmatic governance, for the Macedonian veterans, these actions were seen as a dilution of their hard-won glory, an insult to their traditions, and a sign that their king was going native. This created deep resentment and contributed significantly to the mutiny at Opis. Finally, one of Alexander's most profound failures, with devastating immediate consequences, was his lack of a clear succession plan. Dying suddenly at the height of his power, without a designated heir or established system of governance for his vast empire, he left a power vacuum that inevitably led to decades of brutal wars of the Diadochi. This oversight plunged the Hellenistic world into chaos, suffering, and fragmentation, undermining his grand vision of a lasting unified empire. In conclusion, while Alexander the Great's achievements are undeniable and his military genius unparalleled, a balanced view requires acknowledging the profound human cost, the ethical ambiguities, and the darker aspects of his character and reign. He was a figure of immense light and shadow, a transformational force whose legacy is as much defined by the suffering he caused and the controversies he ignited as by the unparalleled glory he achieved. Understanding these complexities allows for a more complete and nuanced appreciation of one of history's most compelling and challenging figures. We have journeyed with Alexander the Great from the rugged mountains of Macedon to the banks of the Indus, witnessed his meteoric rise, his astounding military triumphs, and the tragic unraveling of his personal and imperial dreams. His life, burning with unparalleled intensity for just 32 years, was a blazing comet across the ancient sky, forever altering the geopolitical and cultural landscape of the world. Alexander was, unequivocally, a military genius without peer. His strategic audacity, his tactical brilliance in combining arms, and his relentless drive redefined the art of war for millennia. He commanded armies that achieved the seemingly impossible, conquering an empire of unprecedented scale and daring to push beyond the known boundaries of his world. He truly embodied the heroic ideal of his age, inspiring fervent loyalty and astonishing feats from his men. Yet, our journey has also revealed the profound paradoxes of his character and reign. The visionary who dreamed of a unified Greco-Persian world could also be a brutal tyrant, capable of horrifying acts of massacre and calculated cruelty. The charismatic leader who inspired devotion was also capable of paranoia, executing loyal companions in fits of suspicion or rage. His relentless ambition, while forging an empire, came at an immense human cost, not just to his enemies, but to his own weary soldiers. His personal quest for glory, entwined with a growing belief in his own divinity, ultimately isolated him even from those closest to him. Alexander's personal empire died with him in Babylon, leaving a chaotic power vacuum that led to decades of brutal civil wars among his successors. His grand political unification was short-lived. However, paradoxically, it was this very fragmentation, guided by his Greek generals, that ensured his most enduring legacy, the Hellenistic Age. His conquests opened up vast new territories to Greek influence, spreading the Koine Greek language, Greek art, architecture, philosophy, and administrative practices across 3 continents. The Alexandrias he founded became vibrant cultural and economic hubs, true melting pots where East and West met, mingled, and created a dynamic new civilization. Knowledge, trade, and ideas flowed with unprecedented freedom, sparking intellectual revolutions and reshaping economies. Alexander's story resonates through time because it speaks to universal human themes: boundless ambition, the pursuit of glory, the allure of power, and the ultimate fragility of even the greatest achievements. He remains a figure of endless fascination and intense debate. Was he a liberator or a conqueror? A visionary or a megalomaniac? A unifying force or a destroyer? His life serves as a timeless epic, a testament to what a single individual, driven by extraordinary genius and an unquenchable will, can achieve. But it also stands as a stark reminder of the profound, often chaotic, consequences of such power when untempered by a vision for true succession or the limits of human endurance. Alexander's unfinished symphony echoes through history, its powerful, complex notes continuing to inspire awe, prompt reflection, and challenge our understanding of leadership, conquest, and the intricate tapestry of human civilization.